All right, we'll call this June 1st, 2023 Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. We're going to start with roll call first. To my left, Saeed Safavian.
Here.
And John Bachman.
Here.
Carrie Bosworth.
Here.
Ajay Shakapani.
Here.
Wasim Fayed.
Here. Here.
And Mike Bresco, I'm here, and Mark Bachman has an excused absence. Julian, would you please read the meeting accessibility statement?
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with the latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comment through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://us06 web.zoom.us/j/828-226-487-94. To give public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number, US +1 253-215-8782, webinar ID 828-226-487-94#.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Next is the approval of the agenda for this evening. And we have a presentation on the 2024 Economic Development element of the Comprehensive Plan. Also, the Stormwater Code Amendment, Water Quality Enforcement Policy, those two items. There is one item to be added, and that is a director's report. Are there any other comments, additions to this evening's agenda?
Yeah, a quick question. Are the members of the planning committee allowed to provide public comments? Like the last 7 minutes, like is this something allowed?
Our directors are looking, and deputy directors.
Offhand, I don't know, but I can spend a few minutes while the meeting's proceeding to do some research in the municipal code and see if I can find an answer.
Thank you. I can either do that, or if we can add to the agenda some thought that I would like to give afterthoughts based on the training that we got last time. So I can do it as public comment, last 7 minutes, or I can do it as an added agenda item if the planning committee approves that.
I think it makes most sense to go ahead and add it to the agenda if the commission
we'll
is.
make that addition to the agenda and do that prior to the director's report.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with those additions, we'll approve the agenda unless there are any other comments. Okay, hearing none, we'll consider that approved. And next is approval from the minutes from the April 20th meeting. Any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, we'll consider those approved by common consent. So let's get, first we've got non-agenda public comments. And is there anybody online?
We have one hand raised.
Okay.
Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Good evening, Planning Commission. This is Mary Wichter. I've lived in Sammamish 22 years. I just have a brief non-agenda comment tonight. I see that housing will be coming up, I believe, at your next meeting on June 15th. And we had done quite a bit on housing things in like September, October of 2022. And I know that some of you were not actually on the commission at that point. So there's some good articles out there. There's one from the Upshot. It's from the New York Times publication because they were doing things about every week or every month on housing. It was pretty good. Even Councilmember Amy Lamb had mentioned it as well. This one is called "Whatever Happened to the Starter Home," and it's a number of pages, but it has like half the pages. I think it's like 10 or 12 pages long, and like half of them have black and white old vintage photos of what used to be built before we started having suburbia. And it talks about sort of the missing middle housing that I think is really crucial for housing to be. So I will look back through my emails and try to send out after this meeting so that you guys could read ahead over the next 2 weeks to just be up on that material. I think it's just really good. It doesn't come from me, I'm just forwarding it, but I think it presents really good information. And one of the key things to note is that the types of housing that you can build, where they can build, and kind of the requirements and maybe how much they cost can really be affected by what a local community or a city can do. So keep that in mind. That was actually Amy Lamb's comment back to me, is there's one part in the article that specifically points to that. So thank you. Have a good meeting. I'll be listening and maybe speak at the end.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Anybody else?
And we have one more hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I didn't have anything, prepared, but I heard Mary speak about the housing and thought I would give a very top level thing just to talk about a little bit that I think you'll find interesting. And it also has to do with housing that we've been working on in the past and will be coming on in the future, but it's not about tonight's agenda. A very interesting high point. I've been doing some work on figuring out how many households are in various economic segments in the community, and a relative proxy to the number of homes available by, I think almost all of you know, I've been in real estate since the late 70s and have been working on the east side since 1990, the state of Montana, before that. And it's not the same as the assessor's records, which we still need to get, but you can look at how many homes sell across Sammamish in price points that are affordable to those economic AMI groups. And a pretty startling thing I've discovered, there's two parts to all this. I'm not going to have time to go into it. There is the actual household income side, which goes up to 200,000 income. Then after that, you need to use PUMs to go higher. And that doesn't use AMI, that use what's called income bins, B-I-N-S. But from the 0 to 200,000 household income, which equates to an AMI of 0 to 150%, a cumulative total is very interesting. 51% of the households in Sammamish fall from 0 to 200,000, which is from 0 to 150 AMI. 51% of the households, and 49% are over 200% AMI. But the number of homes that sold in 2021, this is all 2021 data, that were affordable commensurately to those AMI levels was 25.5%. So that's nearly a 25% gap in those, and most of those are tied up equity, the people that live here already, but there's not housing available for them to buy to stay in Sammamish. You've heard me talk about that. Anyway, a lot more to come on all this. There's a lot of interesting data that's unfolding. So I just wanted to share that one big piece of information. Have a good meeting.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else, Julian?
And we have no more hands raised.
Okay. All right, so we'll move into our first agenda topic for this evening. It's an informational presentation on the economic development element of the comprehensive plan update. Deputy Director Hildy is going to introduce the topic.
There we go. Well, good evening. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kelly Hildy. I am the Deputy Director of Community Development. Joining me tonight is Jason Thibodeau with PSRC. I will kick off our conversation by providing an overview of the scope of work scope of work for developing the city's first economic development element. I will then hand it over to Jason, who will dive into the process of developing an economic development element, referencing the guidance document published by PSRC in 2022, in which can be accessed through the agenda packet. Jason will also provide regional data trends and U.S. Census data specific to Sammamish. The economic development element will establish citywide goals and policies to promote long-term fiscal stability, support small and community-based businesses, foster equitable economic growth, encourage innovation, and support the diversity of the community. As we progress with this work, it's important to note that this update will comply with the Growth Management Act, Vision 2050, and the King County countywide planning policies. The City Council approved by resolution a vision statement for the 2024 Comprehensive Plan. To recap, the three key focus areas within this vision statement that focus on economic development include building a thriving town center and mixed-use districts, supporting local businesses and entrepreneurship, establish fiscal sustainability, and diversify revenues for the city. To ensure the success of our efforts, we are partnering with the Sammamish Chamber of Commerce, an established organization that shares similar objectives. This collaboration will provide valuable guidance and feedback on the research and analysis conducted for the development of the economic development element. It is critical that the final element reflects the needs and priorities of our business community within the broader context of Sammamish. With that said, let's dive into the various phases of our planning process. In phase 1, we will develop an economic profile and conduct a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. This phase is scheduled from May to June, involves analyzing economic data to create a comprehensive profile of Sammamish's economy. We will pay special attention to the impacts of the pandemic, business activity, retail spending patterns, commuting data, revenues, and opportunities to enhance economic conditions and meet community goals. Moving on to phase 2, which spans from May to October, our primary focus will be on public engagement. We will conduct in-depth focus group interviews with representatives from our business community, community and economic development organizations, and nonprofit entities. Additionally, we will host community and business surveys on the Envision Sammamish 2044 website, giving community members and business owners an opportunity to provide their feedback. Furthermore, we will actively seek input at the farmers market and city events, directly engaging with the community to better understand their preferences and priorities for economic growth within the city. Throughout this phase, the partnership with the Sammamish Chamber of Commerce will be essential as they will provide valuable feedback based on the work completed during phase 1 and 2. Phase 3, taking place from October to December 2023, is dedicated to developing the economic development element itself. Based on the findings from the previous phases, we will draft goals and policies for Planning Commission and City Council review, recommendation, and approval. Of course, the final economic development element will be approved as part of the comprehensive plan, which is due by December 31st of 2024. To complete this work, we have secured a grant from the Port of Seattle, which, when combined with the city's contribution, provides us with a total project budget of $57,600. This work will be carried out as part of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan update, with a draft element completed and submitted to the Port of Seattle by February of 2024. Upcoming milestones on our project timeline kick off with tonight's presentation by PSRC. Also, in June, we will conduct surveys and focus group interviews to gather input from the community and local businesses. We'll also be at the farmers market throughout the month. I was there last night and we received a ton of feedback, so that was very exciting. On July 18th, we'll present the Phase 1 findings to the City Council, followed to the Planning Commission on July 20th. Collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce throughout July and August, we'll shape the draft goals and policies, which will be presented to the Planning Commission for review on September 21st and the City Council on October 21st. Finally, in February of 2024, we'll submit the draft economic development element to the Port of Seattle. This document will serve as a significant milestone in our comprehensive planning process. So that includes my very brief presentation because I want to hand it over to Jason from PSRC, who will pick up the presentation from here. So I will stop sharing my screen, Jason, to allow you to do so. There we go.
Okay, let's try this. Okay, how are we looking?
Perfect. You are good to go.
Great. Well, Kelly, thanks for that introduction. Kelly and I have connected before to talk about this, and thanks for the invitation. It's the first I've seen that presentation on. I'd just like to start off by saying you seem to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. You seem like you have a good plan together. That engagement and the outreach is super critical and important. So I'm really excited to see where you all are going to be going with this economic development element. So again, I'm Jason Thibodeau. I'm the program manager for economic development at PSRC. Invited here today to just provide an overview of the planning policies that overlay and sort of are in the background of the econ elements, the resources that we have available, help we can provide, and some additional context for you as you're setting out to develop this element. So I think you already know this, and Kelly touched upon this already. You have work underway to develop a comprehensive plan between now and December of 2024. Major updates on a 10-year cycle. And, you know, we are a 4-county agency, and this is the first time all 4 of our counties are aligned. So we've got lots of jurisdictions across our 4 counties that are all tackling this all at the same time, trying to get people on board, trying to get resources together to tackle this work. So we know it's a lot. We're making ourselves available however we can to be supportive of the work that's happening in all of your local communities to develop not just the econ elements, but comprehensive plans as a whole. And of course, this is all built upon and based on Vision 2050, which was adopted by our PSRC's General Assembly. That's the overarching authority board at PSRC, which contains 2 critical things: the multi-county planning policies. We got policies that kind of umbrella policies across our 4 counties that get carried down into our county level policies and then on our local policies. And the other key element that gets a lot of attention in our vision work is the regional growth strategy. It sort of defines the roles for cities of different sizes and the growth projections for them and the allocation. So setting those targets for population and job growth. And specifically, so if you read through Vision and you look through the economy section, we've got a very comprehensive and broad perspective on what is economic development. I'm going to read, you know, you're not supposed to do this, but I'll read this slide to kind of give you an idea, a broader sense of all the things that we lump into our regional economy and our perspective on economic development. We want to have a prospering and sustainable regional economy. We want to support businesses and job creation. We want to invest in people, their health, environmental quality, and create a great central place, diverse communities, and high quality of life. We kind of want it all in this region when it comes to economic development in our economies. It's community-based, it's people-based. And behind that vision statement, another thing that we do, we're responsible for developing a regional economic strategy every 5 years. We've got a relationship with the U.S. Economic Development Administration. So we are required to develop this 5-year blueprint for regional collaboration around economic development. It includes not just the things that we work on here at PSRC, but a broad perspective on goals and strategies, things that folks are working on to sustain and grow our regional economy. Us doing this also allows and enables local organizations to be eligible for U.S. Economic Development Administration funding, grant funding for technical assistance for local projects, requires us to have this core economic development strategy in place. And also, we are a regional planning organization. We do economic development work here. We're one of the many players in economic development, and this is something that helps guide our economic development work plan as well. So just very briefly, our economic strategy is organized around three overarching goals: economic opportunity for people in the region, global competitiveness as we fight for jobs and investments with many regions around the world, and also sustaining that regional quality of life. People like to be here, people like to live here, and it's always been a key competitive advantage for us. We developed this strategy in the midst of COVID, so there's a lot of stuff that we kind of carry forward that are continuing challenges and opportunities, but when we're having these conversations about what our community and our economy needs in COVID, there are some new emphasis areas that we heard about that got integrated into the strategy that I know a lot of local jurisdictions are still thinking about as they're building out their local economic development plans. It's around equity, it's around job distribution, where do people live versus where they work. Now they're working where they live, so that mix has become a little bit different. Broadband was an important challenge that we faced during COVID, where folks were working from home, their kids were having schooling from home, and finding that, making sure we had the infrastructure to support that. Right alongside that is childcare. When we talk to employers around the region, childcare is just a big issue for them, trying to get workers, trying to get people to come in and fill their roles. People need a place to send their kids if they're going to go out and work or work from home, finding some way to balance that. Economic recovery, business recovery, industry resilience were key things as we were coming out of that recession and finding a way to get our economy back up to speed. Health and housing were two key areas under quality of life. Health clearly connected to COVID. Housing, of course, is an issue that has been an issue for this region for a long time, continues to be an issue, changed a little bit during COVID, exacerbated things in some ways, changed things differently. We had a lot of people moving further out from where their jobs are, and now we're kind of dealing with some challenges as people are being forced back to come into the offices, and now dealing with longer commutes and different challenges in our transportation system. So that's the background of our work. One of the other important elements of the economic strategy is we do a good job at analyzing the things that we are unique at in the region. So there's a number of key industries that we have that we're just world-class in, provides a lot of background information in there. It's a good resource to learn more about these industries from a data perspective, from a key employer perspective, from a workforce development perspective. And this can be a good contextual tool as you're sitting down and thinking about identifying some targeted industry sectors, getting a better perspective on what's happening maybe outside of your borders, but also within the region to help set some targets and goals. So I touched upon this before. We are in the economic development world. We are not the only player in the economic development world. We've got a couple of things that we really focus on: analysis and strategy development. We're home to the regional economic strategy. We're home to a lot of data and analysis that can help local jurisdictions plan and do their local work. So we continue to do that in between the major strategy updates. And sometimes this is targeted on particular industries, particular workforce challenges. We're a big table, so when people are facing challenges or looking at opportunities that maybe go beyond their borders, go beyond their expertise, require multiple parties to come to the table, we often help facilitate that. We also recognize that, again, we're not doing everything. So amplifying the work that others are doing. We've got a broad set of economic development board members from both public and private sector, varying perspectives. It's a great place to come, identify things that we can add our voice to, add support to, even if we're not working on directly. And then that third bucket, and kind of what we're talking about here today, technical assistance and support. What are the ways that we can help you as a local jurisdiction with your local economic development planning, thinking about maybe applying for a U.S. Economic Development Administration grant, whatever it may be. We try and be as helpful as possible to local jurisdictions in the work that they're doing. So to switch into the specific task at hand, which is you have an economic development element that you're focusing on. We've got a lot of tools and resources that we've put together to help do this. And so when we set out to develop the economic development element guide, we started with this plan review manual. So we wanted to start with, at the end of the day, when jurisdictions are submitting their comprehensive plans, we've got a team on our growth management side that is doing the reviewing and the certification and the commenting on that. We're there as advisors, but we're not doing that directly. So this element guide really identifies specifically what are the things that they're looking at, that they're looking to reference and check off. That's the kind of resource that I like. What am I being graded on? How can I get some tools to help us get there? And so in the plan review manual, there are 7 areas, specific areas that have been identified for review and certification. So we use that, and we developed the economic development element guide. So there are 7 key areas in there, which I'll touch upon each individually. But in the element guide, it provides context on these regional policies, some considerations, some questions to ask, some things to think about, some example local policies from other jurisdictions that are really good examples of thoughtful, actionable policies that local jurisdictions have. And then it's a bit of a data inventory as well. It doesn't contain all the data, but it points to and references some key data points, whether they be data points that we at PSRC house, whether they be at the census, whether they be through other partners. So places that you can go to if you want to get more information about specific things to sort of analyze what you have going on currently in your economy, in your local economy, or ways to kind of set targets out for the future. So I'm going to go through each of them, talk briefly about them. Not all of these are appropriate or fit the same way across all jurisdictions. So I want to make that clear. We've got these 7 areas. There are areas for you to think about as you're having conversations with your local partners. You're doing outreach, you're working with your Chamber of Commerce. Those kinds of discussions will really identify where you are and where you want to be. And this is a good way for you to think about how those conversations can fit into those regional policies that are established in vision. So first off, identifying industries that you want to target in your regional economy. Here we're talking specifically about industry clusters that are identified in the regional economic strategy. Those are more kind of export focused. All communities have a balance, whether it's a regional economy, a local economy. There's a mix between goods and service providers that are building things, providing services for folks outside of their jurisdiction, balanced with businesses and services that are focused more on local goods and services. So local restaurants, retail, healthcare services, grocery stores, et cetera. So there's going to be a bit of a mix across those things. But as part of that, thinking about what do you already have in play? Do you have industrial areas or airports that you could leverage? Are you already part of regional supply chain that you can look to expand on, or use that as a bridge to kind of broader economic base? What partners? And again, you've already identified some of those partners that you can work with, whether they be chambers of commerce, local educational institutions. And then reference, this context around you. We've got a regional economic strategy. There are county level plans. And then you've got your local planning that you do and have done in the past that can be used as that foundation. There's lots of great data. We've got covered employment estimates, so you can get a good idea of the jobs that are currently in your communities. It's always good to know who your major employers are. I think it's easier in smaller communities than in larger communities sometimes to know who the businesses are. what employees are there, what the employee needs are, and again, another pitch for the regional economic strategy as a resource to be able to use. So after identifying those industries, one of the important things to think about is, where do you want to go and how do you get there? And how does recruiting new businesses, retaining and growing the existing businesses you have play into that? And given limited resources, how do you target those things? So if you look in vision, there's a lot of considerations in there. We've got some examples here. Are you looking for specific types of living wage jobs, or are you thinking more about, hey, here are the local goods and services that my local community needs, and thinking more about kind of the customer in that perspective? Do you have targets for local owned businesses, emerging businesses, women and minority owned businesses, startup businesses? So really thinking about, in a world where all of us are strapped for resources, you want to do recruitment and retention. How do you focus those efforts in a way that's manageable and that's targeted? And doing that, some communities do it differently. Some folks do that directly. Other folks partner with other regional economic development organizations. Each county has an associate development organization that's tasked from the State Department of Commerce to do business recruitment, retention, and outreach. That could be a good partnership with you identifying those core industry sectors, working with some other organizations to help do some matchmaking between what your needs are and what they're hearing out on the street as far as businesses that are looking for spaces, businesses that are looking for spaces throughout our part of the region. And then, this is a visioning process. What kind of community, what kind of economy do you have? And integrating those things with your branding and marketing, your hiring policies, strategic partnerships, so that you're creating kind of a cohesive package and a cohesive vision for your local economy. Number 3 here, expanding access to opportunity and removing barriers for economically disconnected communities. And this could be looked at from 2 perspectives. You have parts of your community, geographic parts that you want to make investment in and bring broader economic opportunity to. Do you have populations in your community that you want to target and bring better economic opportunities to? And talking with your local community, looking at data, doing outreach are really ways that you can identify what those opportunities might look like. And then again, through those conversations, identifying where your community wants to go. And you can use that to help dictate what those policies and what those targets could be. So connecting those specific communities, providing targeted infrastructure investments. Is it targeted educational outreach, government contracting, investment of those public funds? And one interesting tool that we have is the PSRC opportunity mapping. So you can look at your community, you can look at things on a smaller scale. There's a bunch of factors in there, education, health, et cetera, connection to transportation. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use that tool to identify where some opportunities might be for you to develop some policies. Mitigating displacement is another area that we've identified. Just this physical, economic, and cultural displacement of existing businesses. And again, each community is going to be different. Some communities are dealing with displacement in different ways. Challenges with housing are oftentimes displacing certain types of kind of older building infrastructure and replacing it with housing, and communities are losing some of those local kind of culturally relevant historical businesses because of other market pressures. So there are some tools in your tool belt that you could think about and use regarding zoning, regarding kind of targeting business districts and sustaining them. And I think, again, the key is doing the outreach to the businesses, finding out what those businesses in your community need, and working and identifying ways that you can partner with them to help make sure that their businesses continue to be successful in your community. It's another interesting area. So developing a range of employment opportunities to create a closer balance between jobs and housing. And here's where I'm going to bring in some local data. This is one element of the comprehensive plan. You've got a housing element too. So you're identifying your housing needs. So what are your housing needs? And part of that could be, what are our local jobs look like? Who's working there? Do they have the housing that they need? Kind of the flip side to that is that you've got a lot of workers and workforce in your community, in addition to the jobs that are there. So how do you look at the people that are living in your community right now and pair that up with some job goals that you might have? So what's the workforce look like? And are there ways that we can take advantage of our job targets in order to help connect those local jobs to the local workforce? And so I always find this to be a really interesting tool. And every time I get asked to come and talk to a community, I do this. And this is an inflow-outflow model that's provided by the US Census. It's called the On the Map tool. And it's a unique place that connects two different data sources. We've got job data, so we can look at job locations and the number of workers in Sammamish or in any other community. We can look at census data and we can find out who lives. This is a data source that connects those two things. So it knows where people live, it knows where people work, so we can see how those things match up. And what you're looking at here is, and this is 2020 data, so it's a couple of years old, but it provides a good high-level perspective on kind of the major drivers of the flow of your worker, your balance between jobs and workforce. And so what this is showing here, that on any given day, you've got almost 6,000 folks that are commuting into your community for a job. You've got almost 900 folks that both live and work in your community. And you've got more than 30,000 folks that live in Sammamish that are working other places. And I think this lines up with kind of what I've understand about your local community. It's not a huge job center. It's more of a residential center. And the task that you have on hand is to think about, okay, within that context, what kind of economic development are we looking for? What kind of economic development are we interested in? What's the scale of that? And again, that should line up with your growth targets, your population and job growth targets. So another thing that I like to pull here, and for your community, it's a little different. Often there's a bit more of a balance between the inflow and the outflow. So in some cases, folks have more jobs than certain kind of workers. In other cases, they have more workers than jobs. For Sammamish, looking at just the scale between the number of jobs in the community and the number of workers, regardless of where they work, you've got a heavy balance of workers compared to the jobs in your community. And the top three identified here are information, retail trade, and professional, scientific, and technical services. So those are your big three in terms of the workers and your workforce that's in your community. And so that can be helpful in a couple of different ways. Again, if you have targets, if you're hearing from your community that you want to have more job centers and job spaces, tapping into that existing workforce could be a really good way to pair up what your targets are with an asset that you already have in your community, which is a really strong workforce. Number 6 here is promoting environmental and socially responsible business practices, especially those addressing climate change, resilience, and improved health outcomes. So again, this is kind of a broader conversation. That outreach to your community, your business community, your local residents can be really helpful. How do they see the Sammamish economy of the future? What do they think about? Is there an environmental aspect to it? Are there things that you can build into your policies in terms of what the growth looks like? But also, are there ways, there's lots of effort at the state level, at the regional level, at the industry level to target businesses that are addressing climate change, that are providing the goods and services that are working to mitigate the effects, provide compensation for it. And that could be an opportunity, that could be a growth opportunity if you're looking to get into that. So again, another one where conversations with your local community, your local business leaders, your local workforce, your local residents can really kind of help you translate what you're hearing into some actionable goals related to economic development. And then finally, number 7, support, recognize, and empower the contributions of the region's culturally and ethnically diverse communities, institutions, and native tribes. I mentioned at the beginning when we do our economic development strategy that quality of life is a key element. People like to be here, people like to live here, and part of that is the elements that they see in their communities that make these a good place to live. So if you've got assets, community assets, structural assets that exist, it could be this could be a really good way to identify and think about some of them local assets in terms of the economic development benefit that they could be able to provide. So I'm going to kind of start to close up here. I gave you an overview of that economic development element guide. There's a lot more information and a lot more context in there. We're also available to come and talk in more detail with your local planning staff, and if that can be helpful. I made a reference to the larger Vision 2050 Plan Review Manual that provides context not just on the economic development element, but on all of the elements, kind of shows you what the reviewers are going to be looking for. We got a link here to the regional economic strategy. I encourage you to take a look at that and kind of see what the broader context is, what other folks are working on, maybe identify some strategies in there and some opportunities. And then this kind of round that I'm doing to local communities stemmed out of a broader and longer training around the economic development guide that we put together as part of a passport series that we're doing. So it covers not just the economic development element, but it covers many other elements and aspects of the comprehensive plan. They're all recorded. They're all up on our website. There's associated resources for them. So lots of resources that we have available for you to reference, to look at as you're putting your economic development and your broader comprehensive plan together. And we're happy to connect at any point to talk more. Liz Underwood Boltman, who is our principal planner at PSRC on our growth management team, she's going to be one of the key reviewers for the comprehensive plans. All of our cities and counties are assigned out to our staff. So Liz is the main point of contact for that review and the certification. I'm a good resource for economic development element related questions. I can work with Liz on any questions that come up. We're happy to be brought to the table at any point as just sort of another ear, another voice, as you're working through this stuff, as you're hearing things. If you're looking for, other ways that we can be helpful, we want to hear about them. So happy to continue the conversation. And yeah, those are the slides that I have for you. A lot of information there. We got a lot longer version of that too. So if we want to dig in more, happy to do that. And I'd love to just hear from you all about any questions that you might have about the work that you have ahead.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Jason. I'm going to hand it over to our vice chair to open it up for any questions related to our scope of work or just in general economic development. Jason and I are here to answer those questions.
Okay. Say?
Thank you very much, Jason, for the report. I have quite a number of questions, so I'm going to kind of limit myself to first few and then give a chance to the other members of the commission. You show a slide that made reference to the 6,758 people employed in city of Snoqualmie. This is supposed to be city of Sammamish. Look at that slide.
Yeah, sorry, it might have been this.
I think it was one of the slides, it was supposed to be Sammamish, but it said Snoqualmie. Jason has been on a tour with a lot of communities given this presentation, so we're going to give him a little slack on that.
Okay.
No, I want to check. Let's see.
Look at that slide. Shows.
So continue to ask. I'm going to see
Okay.
if I can. It's mislabeled if it's labeled that way.
Right. Jason, you made a reference to, you showed a slide showing different regional export classification. I didn't see anything as far as agriculture and farming. How active, how much of businesses do we have that should be, where would that be classed into? There is no class that you can fit it into those classification that you
Yeah,
showed.
it's kind of in a separate data source. If you want to look into that a little more, I'm happy to take a look and we can dig into that a little bit more. Sort of the direct agricultural stuff. You know, you get other types of things. You just talk about value add, food processing. Those things will show up in those more industrial categories that I showed. But the direct agricultural stuff, you're talking about farming, you know, picking, et cetera.
Right.
That's not in that data source. That's in a different data source.
What is the role of the city in economic development?
What's
What
the
do you
role of your
expect?
city in economic development?
Right.
That's a good question. I think every community and city thinks about it differently. You know, for some, it's about laying the bricks, laying the foundation, providing the platform for private sector to come in. In other communities, there's a lot more kind of direct, targeted efforts to grow businesses, to recruit businesses. Workforce development is a key element in economic development. You know, there's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of ways for you to go in terms of what the city wants to commit to and target in terms of how you vision your role in economic development. And I'm sorry, I'm kicking it back to you, but I think for every community I talk to, they have a different perspective on what their role is, what they should be focused on. Some of that's political, some of that's budgetary, some of that's, you know, a matter of size and scale. Again, tying back to what I see at the top level for the data, there's a smaller amount of jobs in your community. It's a larger residential community. And that really provides an important context for you in terms of, you know, what do you want the Sammamish economy to be and how do you want to work towards that? And that's really going to dictate the role that you're going to play in that kind of economic development.
I'm assuming that partnership would be one of them. City partnership in some of those city would partner with the private entities and different sectors to make economic development actually implemented.
Yeah, so if you've got business, if you want to even think about targeting industries or businesses for recruitment, you know, and growing those in your region, again, the county level associate development organization could be a really helpful tool to kind of identify kind of what they're seeing in terms of who's looking for spaces, who's looking for places to go, who's looking to make investments, and finding a way to pair that up with what your goals might be, or to help inform what your goals might be to help set those targets. But yeah, especially for the smaller communities, you know, not hugely resourced in terms of economic development staff. So those partnerships with the Chamber of Commerce, with others, are going to be very critical and important in doing that work.
One of the challenges that probably the city has, and I'm sure that the PSRC also has that, is that what would be the base year and the future year? The base year, I'm assuming, is 2023. The data will be based on the statistics from the 2020 census, right? But then the moving target is that when you look at from PSRC, you're looking at 2050. Comprehensive plan, what do we have? What is the base year? What is the future year for the comprehensive plan?
2044.
2044. And then let's see, an economic development, 10 years, right? 10 years in the future?
That is the cycle for updating our comprehensive plan would be every 10 years, yes.
So the challenge, how you're going to kind of deal with all these moving targets going from 5 years to 35 years?
Absolutely. So every 10 years, we do a review of our comprehensive plan. Even though it's a 20-year plan lookout, we're looking at it every 10 years. And that is, again, to make sure we are accommodating the growth and the job targets that we're required to under GMA. Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure. This is a lot of work. This is a lot of work we're taking on, and it's a lot of data analysis. It's a lot of information to provide us that baseline to do that planning effort. It is not an exact science. I think we've said that many a times about our comprehensive plan, but we are using a lot of the data provided by PSRC, guidance not only from them, but from the county and also from the state. To do not, again, just the work on economic development, but for our whole comp plan. So, yeah, it's fun times. We're going to have a good time this next year and a half.
Yeah, I'll just add that we think about, we do a lot of long-range planning at PSRC. Vision 2050 is a long way out. Our economic strategy is 5 years. It's much more of a tactical exercise, right? A lot of the planning that you're doing in your communities, you're thinking about, what foundation are we laying for the future in terms of housing, in terms of spaces for jobs, et cetera. So what are the broad strokes? But then in the near term, what are the things you could do now and over the next few years to make that operational in the shorter term? So economic development is always, operating from a tactical perspective on a much shorter timeline than these longer range plans for housing or overall needs for space, et cetera.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jason, for the presentation and the overview. Going back to your very first slide, this is a pick on Jason comment. I'm not sure that we can fit an aircraft carrier on Pine Lake. So just a little bit of humor there. Anyway. Yeah. The statistics on the external versus internal is very confirming, I think, to all of us, and we understand the dynamic there. And the amount of commercial space we have is pretty limited. In fact, this evening before the meeting, I went out to the Commercial Brokers Association site, and they're showing only 4 available retail spaces in all of Sammamish. And of those, they're all storefront, small business kind. And they also had 2 medical dental spaces. So our immediate opportunities for development are pretty limited. And the comp plan obviously will be tackling some of those bigger issues in terms of density and opportunities, particularly in those commercial areas. Moving on from that, this is a question more for Kelly, I think. Economic development plan needs some sort of advocate within staff. Has staff considered where that's going to land? I know a lot of cities that can afford it go out and hire an economic development manager. I just happened to run into the new economic development manager from Issaquah the other day, just totally by chance. But anyway, I'm not sure we can afford a separate position, but have you given thought to where that's going to land?
Yes, I actually do have a lot of thought on that topic in particular, because as the city continues to grow and continues to prioritize our goals, so climate change, resiliency, economic development, and housing. When you prioritize and transportation, that type of planning effort, there is an assumption, and one that we should all become very comfortable with, that you're going to need staff to help facilitate it. Planning, that's why I'm in this department, is one of my favorite things, and doing that long-term strategic planning, but it comes down to how do you implement those plans? And you need staff to do that. I am definitely not an economic development manager, and it is advantageous of the city and beneficial to the city to consider that type of position, because we do have a business community here that is very active. And as I mentioned, this is our first economic development element. Jason, I think we're one of, I don't know if we're the only city that does not have an element, or one of very few that does not have an element. So this is very important. This is, again, a priority of our city council. And along with that, we are going to be looking at staff resources to support this, because it's just not what you put down on paper, it's how you implement it. And that is very critical and important. So.
Yeah. You're right. It's either one or two. You're one of one or one of two.
Right.
Maybe one of two. So something I mentioned, I think, is really important. Limited space right now. Limited retail space. One of the things that we've seen across communities, especially kind of once folks started to be able to do anything and get out of their house, the places that were solely job centers are the ones that were really struggling to return. The local communities, the kind of neighborhood centers, the ones that were recovering faster. And the reality for folks is that right now, I'm guessing a lot of those tech workers that live in Sammamish are spending a lot more time in your community than they were pre-pandemic. A lot of time for a while, and then even if they're required to go back into the office, we're starting to, you're hearing about coming back in 3 days a week, but not every day. So you've got a lot more people spending more time in your community on a more regular basis. And what we've seen in other places, those lunch spots, grocery stores, those local services in the communities, there's more demand and activity related to them. And so that could be an important perspective for you all to really think about as you're talking with your local communities, not just the businesses, but if you're thinking about that big workforce that's in your community and what their needs are, it could help potentially define the types of spaces, the types of services in the long term that you might want to need. Because as we're going back to the office more, I don't think, especially in this region, we're not going to go back to the way that things were. There's just going to be more people working from home offices, at least part-time, for the foreseeable future. So I know that's a hard thing to deal with in the near term with limited spaces, but you might hear from your conversations that there's demand if there are more options. I don't know if folks are spending, making lunch at home every day, or maybe going to an adjacent community or town to grab coffee or to have a lunch meeting, whatever it might be. But that could be a key opportunity for you.
And I'll just add to that. We've had some early feedback and conversations, not only with the chamber, but with our community. As I mentioned, I was at the farmers market last night. And man, I don't think I stopped talking for 3.5 hours, talking to our community members and what they want. They want more restaurants. They want entertainment. They want to stay here. They don't want to go to Issaquah or Redmond to find those services. They want it here. And it really speaks to what Jason was saying, is we have a large population that is not going back to the office full time. And so what we're hearing from the chamber is we want flexible workspace. We're a home-based business. We want to be able to rent a space for meetings or go to a coffee shop to have a conversation with a client. So that is very reflective of Sammamish, right? That seems very sizable, and it's been really interesting to hear that feedback. And we'll be back at the farmers market. We'll be doing more community engagement and surveys to kind of narrow in on those wants. But that is some early feedback we're hearing, and it's really starting to line up with what we know about our community. So that's good.
Yeah. This is a good encouragement. Sorry if are we going long? This is a good encouragement for a community that has not had an economic development element, that maybe has been hesitant to do so because you don't want to turn into a different type of community. But this is kind of, if you're not having those conversations, this is potentially what you're missing, right? Mm-hmm. You're missing hearing from your community members about the things that they need. So it's not about turning into something else, turning into a different type of community, but better meeting the needs and the wants of the folks that are already there right now, in a way that, you know, there's a huge demand for it. And it's just a matter of the work, the challenge, and actually serving it. But if you're, I'm not surprised you're hearing that kind of feedback, especially from folks that are going to farmers markets, right? People that go to farmers markets love the communities that they're in. They want to be there. They'd rather not go to Issaquah, not to pick on Issaquah, but you know, if they can stay in Sammamish and have dinner and hit the farmers market and do more things, then I think there's more and more of an appetite for that across the region right now.
Yeah, so that leads into my last comment, which is we have the classic example of collision between development interests and community interests when Trader Joe's took over Ace Hardware. So everyone in the community wants a hardware store, but there's no place to put it. So, you know, even with a great ED plan, you're somewhat at the will of the classic capitalistic forces. So, but having an ED plan can help, I think, in some of those areas.
Absolutely. And we can't think of economic development in a silo. It has to be done as we're reviewing our land use alternatives. It has to be done as we're reviewing our housing element and our transportation element. That needs to be balanced. And I just think that is such a great point. And we will be coming back here shortly to talk about land use alternatives and housing alternatives. But when we're thinking about that, we need to broaden that, and we need to think, how is this supported by economic development, or how can it support economic development? Because we are limited on commercial space, which makes that a very expensive commodity. And that is also feedback we've heard, is the rent is expensive. So it's demand. And it's demand we clearly need. So really understanding what that is so we can plan for it appropriately. So think sub-area planning, because we've talked a lot about that with our housing action plan, now known as the Housing Diversification Toolkit. I'm still getting used to that. But yes, it needs to be balanced with the other elements, and we need to kind of do that checks and balances as we continue to move forward with our comp plan update.
Thank you. All right, well, one of my questions was going to be, what did you hear last night? So you've answered that, check.
Oh, I would like to also add, they would like to see more cultural events.
Okay.
They want to be entertained, and a lot of creative space too. I mean, that makes sense. We are a very creative community, so making sure we're having space for, to support local artisans, and that development. So that was very exciting. I had a great time last night.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that leads into, you know, as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking, what is our product? You know, some cities have, minerals in their soil, and that is what, they gain, revenue from that, or they have agriculture. And so I spent the weekend being like, what is our product? I mean, back in the day, it would have been trees, right? I think there was a mill here, but we're not going to cut our trees down. And so if we don't really have a product, then I was thinking, well, then the product is kind of, to your point, if people are coming here for schools, like students, or people who live here, then the product is things for them to do or benefit from while they're here. And so definitely just was, an exercise I did, and dovetails into the feedback you're getting. Yeah. And then another thing I was looking at over the weekend, I loved Parcel Viewer. I'm always on there. And I was just looking at space and excluding single family homes. I was looking for the large spaces and things like golf courses, mixed use centers, and schools and things like that. And I was looking at the property taxes, and then it was interesting. Obviously, the commercial centers have some amount of property tax, right? But it was much lower than residential. And then I looked at Saffron, and it went way up again because there is housing there as well. And so it just sort of, housing is sort of our product. And so this dovetails into our other elements of, if we can maximize that space, commercial and housing, then potentially we get more revenue, right?
Absolutely. Another piece of feedback we got, and a lot of it, is lodging. We, we have family coming to town. They're not staying in Sammamish unless they're renting an Airbnb, or they're staying in Redmond or Issaquah, a hotel. So, considering that as part of our mixed use centers, as well as providing lodging options.
Interesting. And yeah, so I would be curious as we go along, what type of revenue does that generate? Is it
Absolutely.
Does it count as housing, or does it count more as, whatever it is that, however things get charged for commercial? Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to say, thank you, Jason, as you were giving your presentation. I love just things that make us think about things differently. So I think it was number 5, expanding jobs here. And that was just an interesting thought. Retail is obviously, that's a no-brainer. If we have a lot of people going out for retail and people want retail or services, then expand those opportunities here. But even like information workers and things like that, I hadn't really thought about how do we keep them in and promote that. So that was just interesting to think about. If that is our top, one of our top employments, how do we make that happen here? So that was just interesting to think about it that way. And I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So great presentation, Jason. I really liked your presentation. It explained the element guide, which I was reading like a theoretical document, but you brought it into this one. So I have a question about one of the factors that is mentioned in the element guide, and that was the jobs to housing ratio. And the opportunity mapping tool that you have on the PSRC website is fantastic. But it brought up one point, which is that this area is filled with people who are highly educated and who naturally go towards Redmond or towards Seattle for work, whether it is in Amazon, whether it's in Microsoft, and all those things. So then it brought back onto the job housing ratio. If we have a lot of those people and the jobs are in Redmond or in Seattle, we are always going to be low on it. And in your map, you show a job housing ratio of 1.31, which is for the region, Seattle being around 1.71. And I was thinking, how much would Sammamish come up to? And I'd be really surprised if we were in our teens trying to be there, right? I mean, it's not a bad thing. It could be that, again, we could be a community where people treat this as their home and not as this one. But is through the document as I went through it, through the element guide that I went through it, there was more of an encouragement to get towards 1 on the job housing ratio. Is that a goal of this whole effort, that we should try to become a 1? Because if we are trying to do that, that is not a unitary factor by itself. Now, then we start talking about commute, then we start talking about people, and then we start talking, like you mentioned, is it becoming a community that we don't want, that we may or may not want over here? So how are we supposed to balance that out over here?
So I think the short answer is no. I don't think the goal is to get to 1. I think the good and bad about it is that's the sort of the simplest calculation that someone can do, and it can sometimes reflect challenges that a community is facing, right? So one of the things that we've heard about from a regional perspective is that housing challenges in Seattle have created increased housing prices in Pierce County, have increased traffic congestion on I-5 between Pierce County and Seattle. So there are these sort of follow-on effects of that. The challenge with the numbers is Sammamish is somewhat different in that there's a small amount of jobs and a large amount of workers and population. Even communities that are close, like if you look at, say, the city of Kent, that has a pretty good balance between jobs and housing, the ratios are still the same. 90% of those people are leaving Kent to go work some other place, and 90% of the jobs in Kent are filled by folks that are coming from other places. And that may be okay as long as certain things are true. Do we have the transportation system and the transit network to help support that in a way that's not terrible for everybody that needs to do it? Are people doing that because they can't afford to live where they want to because of our housing challenges? So I'd say the ratio is a simple way to go. You know, we end up kind of referencing and talking about it in different ways. It's not the best. It's the really basic. It's the not even the first thing you look at. It's almost the 0.5 before you start to really get into, more importantly, what are the challenges? And like you said, and I think that's right, Sammamish could just be a place where people reside. And as long as it makes sense for them to commute to Bellevue, Bellevue is one of the unique places in the region where it has more jobs than it has people, right? So it's a job center. The city of Seattle, even though it's a job center, it's so big and there's so many residents that it's still more of a balance. But some places, like on the east side, you know, Redmond and Bellevue, those are job centers, and they get commuters in from places like Sammamish. And that can work as long as it works. If it works for you, if it works for them, if it works for if it works for the cities and it works for the commuters and it works for the employers, then it can work okay. So again, I think it's one part of a broader context, just to think about kind of the kind of community you want to have for your workers, for your residents, for the folks that want to live and work in your community. If all those things are working, then that number, I don't think, is ever going to be one. I don't think it needs to be one for you to be successful in the ways that you want to be successful.
Great, thank you. That was great, because then going back to the element guide, one of the terms that I saw there was a bedroom community, which means that then it is fine that it is a bedroom community. It can then start looking at servicing needs that would be like, for example, a restaurant, or like what Kelly, you saw in the farmers market, which was to say that I want to spend more time over here. I don't want to travel outside. I'm in Sammamish. I live in Sammamish. I'd rather spend it over here. So this bedroom community servicing its own people, its own needs, as it were. Jobs still go out. Like you said, Kent could be 90% out and 90% coming in from somewhere else. It could be something that can happen. We're there, and we will probably not have a great GHR, but that's okay. Is that how I'm supposed to read that element of it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, just thinking about that data more, I didn't show it here, but that tool that I showed, that with the inflow and the outflow, you can get really granular about where people are coming and where people are going. So for those people that are leaving, you can see where they're going, and you can see how long their commutes are. You can see what direction they're heading. You can see what specific, jurisdictions that they're going to, and I think that's an important part to think about. It's like, what's specifically happening, and does it work? And I think, you know, in the case of Sammamish, if your workers are being employed in an adjacent jurisdiction and it's a reasonable commute, and it's all about where you draw the lines. You know, we've got big counties. You know, you think about a city the size of Seattle. If you're commuting from one corner to the other, you know, it's an hour drive in rush hour, and that's a one. You've got a job and a resident in the same quote unquote community. You know, maybe you've got someone from Sammamish that's commuting to Redmond, and it's a 15-minute, 20-minute drive, but you're leaving the community. Is one better than the other? Yes, I would say the shorter commute is better, right? You know, it's not about, we can be really jurisdictional here, but the reality is where you draw those lines ends up having a lot of data impacts, but not necessarily impacts on the people that are experiencing those things.
That's great, because then with ST3 coming, that might just take out the question of the commute, because it feels all relative for people. They're going to be like, oh, it takes me so much time to go from here to, I don't know, Renton, or not even Renton, to Seattle, and tomorrow when ST3 comes all the way out to East Redmond, they'd be like, yeah, I got it. I'm able to drive, and it has reduced my travel by half, if it is anything, and that's great, and I want to do this thing. So now what I did was that when I went into the opportunity mapping, I started mapping how that would be, right? So people get in and they're like almost getting an hour back, and what are they going to do for the hour? So then I went into what you had as a taxable retail sales table, which was a very interesting table, and it tells what are all the elements that measures the amount of retail sales in a particular jurisdiction. So I said, okay, if we were to do Sammamish, obviously we're not going to have cars and other vehicle dealers over here. We're not going to have that. So we'll still go out for that. But even if it is not the case, food service, like we just talked over here, healthcare, social assistance, household goods repair, and so on and so forth. Although we lost the Ace Hardware, but then opportunity comes up, and it could bring back the thing. Is that how I'm supposed to read that? Which is to say that, okay, let's look at taxable retail sales. Am I getting somewhere in that with the factor that I'll be a bedroom community, and with the factor that people will be happy to live over here, given that commute has become better? I mean, obviously we'd like the transit to come all the way to Sammamish, but if geographically that's going to be really hard to do. If it doesn't come all the way to Sammamish, can it still service that need? If that comes up and we get this to some extent, would you still consider that as a success to how our planning goes?
Yeah, and one thing to know, right? If you ended up getting a light rail station in Sammamish, I think that's a bellwether for a dramatic change in the type of community that's going to be there, right? It's just going to be more of an intense type of development that you may or may not want. That the commute time is exactly right. You know, just it makes a difference. People willing to the type of commute too. So it's not only time, but you know, there's a difference between driving in traffic and having a coffee and reading your book on the light rail, right? Even if it's the same amount of time, or even if it's longer, there's just a different experience, and that's going to be different for different folks. Related to the retail sales, we don't do it. So we have a reference in there. You can look at your current taxable retail sales, which can be insightful and sometimes validating to things that you already know. There are firms that are out there that can give you a leakage analysis, so they can identify for your community how much are you selling of A, how much is being bought by your community members of A. And yeah, it doesn't mean, right, you're going to go out there and have car dealerships, but it could add more weight to and data to this idea that, oh, you know what, we're seeing that people in Sammamish are spending a lot on restaurants, just not here. A lot on retail, just not here. A lot on services, just not here. And so that can add on to and supplement the qualitative things that you're hearing from people to get you a better sense of like, here's the measurable impact of the loss by not having the spaces and the businesses available to the community members, because then they just go other places for it.
Okay. Fantastic. You just said to the last point that I was going to bring up, which was that I was like, how do I qualify this, right? So I looked at your SWOT analysis, and I was like, what is the opportunity? Forget about the other things. Let's look at the opportunity that's there. Then I said, okay, let's do this calculation. Tell me if this is how we should look at this thing. If you were to say that there are 30,000 families, and that means, let's just for the sake of ease, let's assume that 40,000 people are traveling out of Redmond and coming back in every day. And let's say that this commute, the transit benefits and other things reduce the amount of time by 1 hour for a person. That's 40,000 hours reduced every day, right? That's 800,000 hours a month. Okay, that is 10 million hours reduced a year, right? And if I do it over like 10 years, that's 100 million hours. Now, if I were to qualify that to say that if it is 100 million hours and everybody spends about $50 that's $5 billion that's sitting over here that could be spent. If we did that and we did this thing, we could have $5 billion of money being spent over here rather than being spent outside Sammamish. Is that how I'm supposed to read it, or am I kind of fudging the scale, the math?
No, I think going through the right thought exercises, I don't think that there are right answers, right? So if you could theoretically reduce the commute time of, or the commute time of all the folks in Sammamish that are commuting other places, what are they going to do with that time? Are they going to spend more time in Sammamish? Are they going to go out for ice cream with their kids? Are they going to, go to the park? What are the things that they're going to do? So there's a time value that you get from your community members. And then there's the kind of maybe more of the qualitative side of it. Like, what is potential economic impact? What do they want to do? Do they want to just sit at home? Do they want to go out to dinner? Do they want to spend more time with their family? Do they want to go see a movie? Go out dancing, see a show? There's a lot of potential there in terms of the economics of it. But these are, I don't know if I can answer those for you. I think your community members can help identify what that opportunity value might be in a shift like that.
I'll take that as you giving me a B for the model that I just put up.
You write your paper up, and I'll try and grade it for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. This was fantastic. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and the tools that were provided. And I think these tools are going to give you a lot of data that's going to be useful. But what I would like to do is I would like to share some data from my perspective as a business owner in Sammamish and a longtime resident of Sammamish. So I'm going to give you the ups and downs and the good and bad of doing business in Sammamish. So as you know, I have a restaurant in Sammamish that started in 2017. And then I also have a restaurant in Seattle that started in 2021. So I was in Sammamish pre-pandemic, lived through Sammamish through the pandemic, and now we're post the pandemic. So when we look at doing business in Sammamish is extremely expensive. Well, this is one of the reasons why you would see not only the fact that there's limited space, but also because of how expensive it is to do business in Sammamish, many retailers specifically will prefer doing business somewhere else. For example, my restaurant that started in 2017 in Sammamish has been surpassed tremendously in sales by the Seattle location that I have. So Seattle location now is doing a lot more than the Sammamish location, even though you hear in the news and everywhere that Seattle, not everybody is going back to Seattle and people are leaving Seattle, but because there's a strong business community there, the business lunches that we get in Seattle is extremely profitable and beneficial for us compared to the a few people who would like to come and socialize at my location here in Sammamish during lunch. So literally, I pay more in labor and payroll to my employees during lunch than I actually get in revenue. I'm not talking about profit, just revenue from the people who come and enjoy lunch at my location. So I'm not saying that it's not profitable. I'm very blessed that I have a very good profitable business in both locations. The point that I'm trying to make here, why is it very expensive to do business in Sammamish? So when I compare my payroll and my labor cost in my Seattle location, it's almost half of what I have to pay in Sammamish, just payroll-wise. Why? Because the people who work in Sammamish, who come and do this type of work, they can't afford living in Sammamish. So as a result, they have to commute far away from locations where they can get low income rentals, for example, or places where they live. They can't afford coming and rent a house or rent an apartment here in Sammamish. Even if they want to rent, it's almost impossible. I have one of my workers who want to rent a house here in Sammamish, and we've been looking for a house for rent for him for over a year and a half, and we haven't been able to successfully, even though I promised him I will pay the full rent. And we're willing to pay up to $3,000 a month for rent, and yet we can't find anything here in Sammamish. So there's an issue of also commuting, transportation. Having people, many people who want to work in this type of jobs they don't have they don't have cars, or they don't drive. In Seattle, most of my employees, they come in the bus, and they don't need to drive. They don't need to park their cars. They don't need to worry about transportation. Whereas in Sammamish, unless you have a car that you can drive and come to work in Sammamish, you can't make it. We have very limited bus system. So we have a limited transportation. The rent, the lease that I had in 2017 for per square foot for my location in Sammamish is more expensive than, there's a third location I'm negotiating right now. It's in the heart of Bellevue. That location, the rent is still cheaper than what I'm paying since 2017 per square foot here in Sammamish. So because of the limited space and the limited availability, the rent is through the roof. So rent is high, labor is high, very hard to find. And why is labor high? Because when you need to recruit people that come in and who live outside of Sammamish, who want to work in Sammamish and can't live in Sammamish, you have to pay them a higher rate in terms of salaries or hourly wages compared to what you would pay, for example, if you had a business in Bellevue or had a business in Seattle. So this is one of the deterrent that is making people stay away. That's why you don't have an Ace Hardware. That's why very few major chains or major retailers are hesitant to come and open businesses in Sammamish due to limited space and due to also the workforce and the fact that it's very hard to recruit people that do this type of work. So I'm optimistic about the new town center plans, and that this is going to create more retail space, provide some competitive rent for those who want to come and open businesses in Sammamish. And hopefully that one of the reasons that I am here on this chair and participating in this planning committee is to figure out how can we solve these issues, how can we solve the transportation, the bus system, the light rail, whatever that we can do to make it easy for people to commute in and out of Sammamish, so the people who cannot afford living here can at least easily commute. But it would be very nice if we can provide housing for those people who want to work and do these services and provide these entertainments, have a movie theater, have a hotel service in Sammamish, have all these things that people want. In order to be able to do that, we need to work on the infrastructure and how can we make it affordable for business to do that. So that's my 2 cents with regard to me doing business in Sammamish and living in Sammamish. At the same time, I still don't believe that Sammamish need to be the other Bellevue, where we have to have all these big businesses come here. It's a beautiful city. It's a city where people like to come and live and enjoy the parks, enjoy the trees. It is not a business business community, in other words, but people want to have those little services. And then we need to figure out how to make it affordable for those service provider to provide those services at a competitive ways and that competes with, so we don't drive them to go open in Seattle, open in Bellevue, or do your business somewhere else. Come and do it in Sammamish. We have a plan for you, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. Thank you.
That's really great information, and it's so valuable for me to come and hear from you all, from you directly, just hearing about the outreach that's being done to be able to get that direct line, because we work kind of with jurisdictions at a regional level, and we get a lot of ground to cover, right? And we can't do a lot of that directly. So it's really critical information to be able to hear. The challenges that you've relayed to housing, I think, I don't focus on the housing element, but that's a key factor in those conversations. When we talk about housing across the spectrum, it's not just for theoretical folks. At the end of the day, it's, do you want to be able to go to a restaurant in your community? And if so, you need to make sure that your community is a place that people that work in a restaurant can live or get to and from their jobs in a way that they're willing to do it without having to pay them such a premium that it doesn't pencil out. So it's something to think about in terms of the future development of housing, and what that means for your local businesses, and not just, it's not just a numbers game. Can you, not to go off track, can you tell me what your restaurant is? I'd love to have lunch there sometime.
Yeah, I own the Tanur restaurant down the street. It's a Lebanese restaurant.
Lebanese restaurant?
Yeah, they're just behind the Met Market.
Okay. Great. Yeah, the wonderful feedback. I'll try not to comment on, I think you're wearing an LAFC jersey in Seattle, so I won't pick on you too much for that.
So I just wear it because I like soccer in general, so I don't specifically cheer for a specific team, but I just wear different soccer shirts.
Okay. I'll let it slide this time.
So I guess my turn, although that's going to be tough to follow. A couple of comments. One is, actually, that's a phenomenal story. And I think for those in Sammamish who are concerned about, more affordable housing because it'll change the nature, need to hear that type of story and the impact that it has. So thanks for sharing that. And the restaurant's great. We don't go there often enough, but I'll talk to my wife. We have an anniversary that we need to celebrate. So I do have a couple of questions and comments, and I'll start kind of at the higher level. I saw early on that the Port of Seattle, and I think this is because they're funding part of this, will be approving or reviewing. And so I'm interested in how the interplay between what the Port of Seattle will be looking at and Puget Sound Regional Council and kind of what those roles are. And maybe tied to that is, what are sort of the elements, if you will, of the economic development element?
Well, that is a great question. So the Port of Seattle has approved our scope of work. That is what they're funding. And that scope of work is based on the 2022 Economic Development Guide produced by PSRC. So when I was writing up the grant application, I relied heavily on that guide to help identify those areas that we needed to address in our element. So as long as we produce that scope of work and we deliver it to the Port of Seattle, we are good. They are not an approval agency. They're just funding this work. But yeah, PSRC will be certifying our comprehensive plan. We will need to assure that we are addressing those items on the checklist, not only relevant to the economic development element, but all of our elements for certification. It will also be reviewed by Commerce. And we also want to make sure we're being, I'm kind of jumping around here, that we are complying with the county's CPPs. So there's a lot of coordination. I hope that answers the question, but we are tracking it and tracking it very closely because this is going to be a major update to our comp plan.
Thank you. And so now, kind of coming in just a little bit, the presentation, I'm looking now at the part of the packet that was sent out, and the first portion is looking at the economic profile, the SWOT analysis, so forth, right? What I don't think I saw, and I'm reading it right now, so it's not clear in the packet, that there's a visioning portion. And so I guess I would say data's great. I mean, I'm kind of an analytical geek, so I love data, but sometimes you can get overwhelmed and you're looking at that, and even if you say, well, people are like going to Redmond and we've got leakage, it could be that they just really prefer for whatever, like you won't get that back. And it dawns on me that we really should have something that says, what are we visioning? And that's part of the work anyways, I would guess. Because, it's not that long ago that I think our vision statement said we are a bedroom community. And no business will be here unless it's a little, shopping center. And what we're talking about is potentially quite a lot different in terms of being able to enable, whether it's an incubator for small startups that can, leverage the information technology, knowledge that our residents have, or some more restaurants or places to make better use of the environment around here, you know? So some sort of like, this is the vision from an economic standpoint, probably needs to be part of this plan. That kind of underpins the economic development element.
Absolutely. And right now we have some good guidance from the visioning work that occurred earlier. Well, actually, this happened over a year ago, but we finally have a resolution from our city council. It gives us a start point. But we really need to complete that economic profile. We need to do that SWOT analysis, and then we need to report out on that to really narrow in on that vision. That is going to help set the fence posts for those goals and policies. And that's the work that our consultant Framework, who is assisting us with this work, is doing currently. And yeah, that includes all that data analysis, but it includes the interviews with our focus groups. It includes the community engagement. All of that's going to get wrapped up in 2 reports, and that's what we're going to come back later this summer and report out on those findings so we can narrow that scope and set a clear vision for what economic development is for the city.
Okay. Speaking of data, or even though I said don't rely so much, one thing that you might consider is to talk to some of the nonprofits in the area.
Yes.
And the vision or the information that you would glean from there is some of the need. Now, not that that necessarily says, oh, we need to do more for the nonprofits, the social nonprofits, but I could speak for the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, that the number of people that are coming to the Get Food right now is gone up tremendously compared to about this time last year. We're talking about 40% more people.
Oh, wow.
And you think, wow, that, you know, the economy's in some ways pretty good, unemployment's relatively low, and part of that is the cost of living has gone up.
Yep.
And these are people in our community. And so, you know, that's part of the same struggle about finding housing and so forth. So it might give a little bit of a window. I don't know if I'd put a ton of effort into it, but a little bit of a different viewpoint than some of the data points that you might be getting.
Absolutely. And if you, like you just mentioned, you have contacts with these nonprofits, please send them to us because they are identified as a focus group we want to meet with and have that conversation, because we do identify that as a stakeholder. Also nonprofits that support business development like SCORE. Those are also folks we want to talk to, and we do have their contact information. So we are currently setting up those focus group interviews. So if you do have contacts and you want to pass those along, I encourage you to do so. So thank you.
You'll get an email.
You're good.
So,
I love emails.
All right. Hey, one more, just this is a pretty down in the weeds kind of question, but I noticed, Jason, in your presentation, you talked about cultural assets, and there's sort of a list that define cultural assets and include working with the tribes and so forth. What I didn't see, and maybe that's part of cultural assets, is the natural environment, which is rich here in Sammamish. And so would that be something like in how we can enhance how the natural environment gets used in terms of maybe there's a little coffee shop or place to eat that's close to where some of the hiking areas or Pine Lake or Beaver Lake or something like that where people can congregate. And so would that be something that would be a possibility around the economic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, people do come and they hike our trails. Look at Duthie. I mean, look at the mountain bike population and how you see them lining up parking. How about if we keep them here and they stay for lunch?
Yep.
Right? They pick up their groceries before they head home. That's really what we want to attract. So I think that is one of the biggest assets for Sammamish is our natural environment, our proximity to the county parks, our own park system, the lake. So we should definitely look at that as some type of local tourism. And again, come enjoy Lake Sammamish and stay, and stay and have lunch at Tenor. I mean, it really is that type of, and that's where you really support those type of organizations that want to promote our. Sorry, it is getting late and my brain just froze out on me. But your local tourism groups. I mean, we do want to hear from them too, and how we can really promote that.
Okay, yeah, because it's consistent with what we view Sammamish as.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
natural environment and can enhance.
Or heck, let's
the
host,
economic
a
benefit of that.
softball tournament, and you have all these people coming into our, our fields, and it's like, oh, why don't you, again,
Yep.
stay a little longer, spend your
Probably
money.
should move on, but I should do a quick check to make sure if there's any other.
Jason, a question. Do you see any similarities between the challenges that we have in our city and city of Mercer Island as far as economic development?
I had a conversation, it's been a little bit, with the folks from Mercer Island, and there's kind of two things to it. One, I think for the most part, they have a similar kind of makeup where they're more focused on providing goods and services to residents, with the one exception of, I think there's a major development that's going in that's going to be commercially focused, I think for a tech company, interactive media company, nearby to I-90, sort of like not surprising that it kind of right on that corridor. But it's been a while since I talked to them early on. I don't know what they've been hearing as far as the outreach that they've been doing. But yeah, Mercer Island would be another example of a community that seemed, when they were starting out, to think about how do we take advantage and capture those economic opportunities that are really focused on serving our local community. So it's not necessarily bringing money in, though you're talking about things like tourism, which certainly brings money in, but more trying to prevent money from leaking out into surrounding communities when people would prefer to do those things at or nearby their home.
Also, you heard from my fellow commissioners that they made reference to the bedroom community. Do you think that the concept of bedroom community exists after COVID? Everybody, a lot of people, they're working at home. So we are not in a bedroom community. A lot of us work from home. So the old concept that bedroom community is where you go to sleep, it doesn't apply anymore. Can you comment on it?
It's a term that probably means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you got enough money, your bedroom could be really nice. You could have a spa in there and a bath, and you could overlook the mountains and, have a little kitchenette. So does the modern version of a bedroom community include a small, locally focused spot where you can grab a cup of coffee, grab some dinner, grab an ice cream cone, go to a park? I think so. I think that there are probably still some people that want to live a completely residential lifestyle and are happy to get in their car and drive somewhere else for absolutely anything. But I think for the most part, people recognize, boy, there's a lot of traffic involved in that. I'd love to be able to get out of the house, see some neighbors, have a quick bite to eat, recreate in a little way. But yeah, again, I think the term can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And rather than focusing on the term bedroom community, which may have a positive or negative context, depending on who you're talking to, and be more specific. I think that's part of what this visioning process is. Be more specific with what you mean, rather than just saying a bedroom community, a community that allows for our residents to be able to meet these kinds of needs locally while commuting other places for their kind of primary work locations.
Thanks very much.
Okay, let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is Stormwater Code Amendment for Water Quality Enforcement Policy. That's a mouthful. And Audrey Starcy is going to introduce that.
Good evening. Nice to see everyone. My name is Audrey Starcy. I'm the Public Works Director for the city. We are very excited to join the meeting this evening and to discuss our stormwater code amendments on water quality enforcement policies. Presenting this evening is our stormwater engineering technician, Lisa Weir, as well as the city's consultants, AHBL. So both Wayne Carlson and Helen Seton have joined us, and whenever the team is ready, we, like I said, very much look forward to the presentation tonight.
May I interrupt really quick? Vice Chair Bresco, we are at 8:15. Before we start the presentation, do we want to extend the Planning Commission meeting?
I was thinking after the presentation, but we might as well do now
I
because
think
we will
it might be a
definitely
good
run out of
idea.
time.
Thank you.
So we need a motion to extend the meeting for about how long? We should go probably till, no, we'll go closer to 9 o'clock probably. Yeah. So extend till 9? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, sorry, Lisa.
Okay, Wayne is going to do the presentation for us this evening. I think if you can pull that up, Helen.
Sure. Actually, Hill and I are going to do this together. So I'll kind of start out and then she can kind of add some stuff. But yes, thank you for the opportunity to present today the Stormwater Code amendments. Next slide. I'll begin by giving you the agenda and then just kind of the methodology. And then I'll turn it over to Helen to get to the recommendations and some of the key changes. And then we'll open it up for question and answer. But our agenda this evening, we'll talk about the purpose and background. We'll talk about the methodology, how we came to the nature of the amendments that are being proposed this evening. Then we'll roll into the recommendation, the proposed key changes, example scenarios, just so you can show that we've kind of gamed this out so you can see exactly what those fines might look like. Additional minor amendments, and then next steps. Next slide. So again, the purpose of this effort and these code amendments really is to update and clarify the stormwater enforcement sections of the Sammamish Development Code. It's to gain compliance for maintenance of privately owned facilities, construction practices and sites, as well as equipment. Equally important, though, is to provide a consistent, fair, and defensible enforcement methods. And so we want to make sure things are predictable, consistent, and fair. And then to create a structured enforcement financial penalty system. Next slide. And so just as a point of background, and I know that the Planning Commission and the City Council are both familiar with the NPDES municipal stormwater permit, but the city under the Clean Water Act is a phase 2 permittee. And as a phase 2 permittee is required to have a stormwater program that includes the 7 elements that you see on this slide. However, elements number 4 and 5 in particular are areas where the city will sometimes see stormwater violations. And so item number 4 is illicit discharge detection and elimination. And so that would be a situation where someone has illicitly maybe connected or discharged to the public system. And within the permit and within essentially the implementation of Clean Water Act, it includes a requirement that local communities like the city of Sammamish have an ordinance or other regulatory mechanism that includes escalating enforcement procedures and actions. And then finally, the other area where we will sometimes see violations would be with respect to controlling runoff from new development, redevelopment, construction sites, and not maintaining those practices. Next slide. So the methodology that was conducted involved conducting a thorough review of the city of Sammamish's existing stormwater code, which is Sammamish Development Code 2103-050. And we discussed some of the implementation issues and challenges with Lisa Weir and folks within her department. And then also reviewed stormwater enforcement chapters for 6 nearby cities and King County permittees, as well as the county, excuse me. Next slide. So, Helen?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So the first, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. The first thing we looked at for Sammamish was to look specifically at their stormwater code in section 2103050. And under that section, as currently written, it says the director shall initially rely on education and informational assistance as much as possible to gain compliance with this chapter. Unless the director determines a violation as a result of a flagrant act that should be addressed through immediate penalties or poses a hazard as defined in the hazard section. The next sort of section of the code talks about civil penalties for water quality and states any person in violation of this chapter shall be subject to civil penalties. And so when they're subject to civil penalties, that amount is currently determined by the director. So it's at the discretion of the director to determine how much the fine will be, but it cannot exceed $25,000. That is reasonably based on the nature and gravity of the violation. So as you can see, there's not a lot of direction of the specific amount that a civil penalty fine would be, and not a lot of predictability for the violator on what the fine could have expected to be. And because of this, it sort of creates a situation that's ripe for appeal and can be tough to defend from the city's standpoint. So when we started looking and comparing what Sammamish's code looked like compared to with respect to other communities in Western Washington, a common theme across all the communities was progressive enforcement, which essentially is the process of enforcement actions, sort of beginning with education, information and voluntary compliance, and then through to the other end of larger penalty fines. So we saw that common theme as required across all of the communities that we looked at. We also saw that the severity of the penalty was based usually upon the nature of the violation. And then lastly, they all contained some form of voluntary compliance, but there was just a little bit of difference in the language that was used when talking about voluntary compliance or corrections. Some jurisdictions had the word may, so may use voluntary compliance, such as Issaquah and Woodinville, and then other ones were more forceful and said shall use, so King County, Kirkland, and Mercer Island. So moving on to something else that we sort of noticed or looked for in the community analysis was how the civil penalties were applied, or the civil penalty assessment. And there were 3 different strategies or different approaches that we saw. The first one being what we see in Sammamish as well as Redmond, where a fine was given at the discretion of the director or the code enforcement officer. This was sort of a less defensible and more subjective method, as it was the director's decision on how much to implement, not what we see in other communities, which was a flat penalty rate fine per day. And that's what we've seen in Issaquah, Mercer Island, Shoreline, and Woodinville. The flat fine that we saw was a uniform per day charge, and it was sort of usually or often it was irrespective of the severity of the offence. So it was the same fine for all types of offences. And then lastly, there was a points-based rating system to determine the financial penalty, and that's what we saw in Kirkland and King County. And if you look over to the graphic on the right-hand side, you can see an example of the penalty matrix that is used in Kirkland, where down the left-hand side, they have a list of 5 enforcement evaluation criteria questions. And then based on the responses to these questions, they would be assigned either 0 point, 1 point, or 2 point. So moving on to our recommendation is for the city to consider amending its stormwater enforcement regulations, and to do this to create a more predictable, objective, and defensible enforcement code, to continue the use of progressive enforcement for stormwater violations, as we've already seen the city is doing, and to implement a points-based system similar to what we see in Kirkland and in King County. So to summarize the proposed key changes, the first one I wanted to present was to broaden the applicability of the King County Stormwater Pollution Prevention Manual. This would mean that it would apply to all prohibited discharges and not just to those from normal single-family residential activities. We've also broadened the language from the word shall to may for the use of progressive enforcement for measures of public education and warnings as the primary method of gaining compliance. Another key change is the removing of criminal penalty and the relocating and revising of civil penalties for water quality from Section 2103.050. So the feedback that we've had from the City Council on previous Stormwater Code amendments was to remove the criminal penalty section from the code. So we've removed Section 6, and with regards to Section 7, we have relocated and revised the section and created a new section under Title 23 called Section 23-100-030, Special Provisions Relating to Enforcement of SDC 2103.050, so the Surface Water Management chapter. Another kind of minor change was to add a couple of definitions to the code to clarify what it is meant exactly by public health and what a violation to public health would be, as well as really trying to clarify who exactly the responsible party is in circumstances of violations. So I guess the biggest change in the direction that we've gone for is, as I said, to create a penalty-based assessment similar to what we've seen in Kirkland and King County. And so the proposed penalty matrix that you would have seen in your packet has 6 criteria questions with point values assigned based on the response to those criteria questions between 0 and 2 points. So you can see here how this would play out in an example if you were going through the matrix. The first question would say, did the violation result in a public health risk? And then depending on the response to that question, the assessor would assign either 0, 1, or 2 points to this question. And just to summarize the rest of the questions in the penalty matrix, so they're all listed here. And we're kind of asking you tonight whether you think these questions, or whether the Commission thinks these questions are appropriate, if they're easy to understand, and if this methodology is meeting the objectives to be transparent, objective, and holding people accountable. So the criteria questions you can see here: did the violation result in a public health risk? Did the violation result in environmental damage? Did the violation discharge into the municipal storm drain system? Was the responsible party unresponsive in correcting this violation? Question about history of compliance problems. And then lastly, was the violation a result of the responsible party failure to implement a required plan? So in your packet, you would have seen the example scenarios and the proposed code amendments. And in those example scenarios and proposed code amendments, the proposed penalty fines matched up to what you see as the low rating fine. So the minimum being 500 and the maximum being 10,000. These are sort of low range amounts line up with what we saw with being used in King County and Kirkland in their penalty matrix, but keeping in mind that they are a couple of years old now. And so what we're asking for tonight as well is some feedback on these amounts. So we've got the low and the medium and the high range for you to look at. And we're going to ask for your feedback on that at the end of the presentation. One thing to note is that these fines are not inclusive of cleanup costs. So they are paid in addition to the penalty fines. And then another thing to kind of acknowledge is that the current maximum fine at the director's discretion is up to 25,000. However, the city has not yet experienced a violation even close to this sort of level of severity yet. We can come back to these at the end. But what we wanted to show you was in your packets tonight, you had those example scenarios where you got to see the penalty matrix questions and how they would sort of result in assigned points and then corresponding fine. But just talking through this one quickly to show the different kind of low, medium, and high range. And so in the first example, there was a heavy equipment operator machine failure, and it was a service provider's vehicle had a hydraulic hose break and is leaking hydraulic fluid to the roadway and to a catch basin. This is the first time offender. They did not have a spill kit available, so they did not correct it immediately. So if we were to implement the low fines that aligned with King County and Kirkland, the fine would be $2,500. For the proposed medium level, $3,000, and the high, $4,000. And then in sort of a more severe violation scenario, we had example 2, privately owned facility not performing maintenance. So it reads, an annual inspection of a private storm has revealed maintenance is required. Records for this facility show maintenance was also required last year and not performed. Records also indicated the city issued multiple correction notices and the owner was unresponsive. As a result, the facility has not been functioning as designed, causing degradation of the wetland downstream. So this was a more severe fine. It scored 9 points on the ratio, and the low fine being $8,000, medium $9,000, into the high $10,000. Switching gears just a little bit towards the end, I just wanted to add in one more slide about some additional minor amendments that are going to be made proposed to be made in conjunction with these stormwater code amendments. So the first one is related to non-compliance fines. So these are not related to stormwater fines, it's sort of separated, but other code violations. And within the section of the code 23-100 civil penalties, we propose to make a flat fine as opposed to a range of fines. It just helps provide more predictability and a more expensive flat fine as opposed to a range where the amount would be determined by the director. So it's really taking some of that subjective judgment away from the director and putting out a more measurable objective amount. And then the second minor amendment is moving the surface water development charge. It's currently listed in the development code, and we're proposing to move this to the city's fee schedule, which is due to next be updated on January 1, 2024. So just a little recap on what I've talked about. So staff is proposing to update the city's stormwater enforcement sections of the Sammamish Development Code to provide consistent, fair and defensible enforcement methods. This includes as well the removal of criminal penalties and the relocation and revision of civil penalties to be contained within Title 23, Civil Code Compliance. The introduction of a points-based penalty assessment and associated penalty fine matrix. And then lastly, those minor amendments that we just talked about to update the non-compliance fines and the surface water development charges being shifted to the city's fee schedule. So to summarize the kind of feedback that we're asking for tonight is whether sort of your thoughts and opinions on the proposed penalty amounts, and if there is a preference to the high, medium or low proposed fines. We're asking you if you think the criteria is easy to understand and follow, and whether you agree with the methodology of a points valued criteria, and if you agree with the overall proposed code amendments. So we're trying to give us some feedback tonight before coming back to you on June 15th for the public hearing. And that sort of leads us into the next steps. So we've had a City Council study session. Now we're having the Planning Commission study session. We've got the Planning Commission public hearing scheduled for June 15th. We've got a SEPA period scheduled from the 9th of June to the 5th of July. And then July 11th is when we're hoping to take this to City Council for the public hearing. So that's the end of our presentations. I appreciate your time and listening tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing any thoughts, questions and comments that you might have.
Okay, thank you. And why don't we start over on this end? Ajay or Asim, would you like to go first?
This is not my area of expertise, but it seems the point system seems to me more on point than the older system, which was not predictable. So and it's harder to enforce because it's the it's basically just a director's decision, and they decide what the penalties are. But if you ask me specifically, not knowing a lot of on the subject, the fine seems to be a little hefty on the high end from my perspective. But again, I'm not the knowledgeable person to provide that data. But I think whatever been proposed here seems to be in the right direction.
Thank you, Chair. So I had one specific question about the historical aspect of it. First of all, a great model, the way that you had given the questions and the examples, that helps model any behavior and how to do this thing. That's a lot of, for lack of a better term, a lot of fun to work with. So it was great. Kudos to the team to have developed that. That's number one. Number two was that the historical offenses also seem to get a 0, 1, 2 measure. Isn't that a problem? Because if I am a historical offender, even if it's a small offense, and I'm just letting the leak seep into the drain like you showed in the picture, but I'm doing that over and over, shouldn't I be penalized progressively or like exponentially than it getting again a 0, 1, 2? Because if it keeps getting 0, 1, 2 even for the historical question, that sounds like it's not penalizing the offender as much as you would want it to be to stop the behavior. Because they might make a calculation to say, yeah, I get this thing, like you said, it could be the fine is heavy, but then it's just the cost of doing business. And if they continue to do that, then we have nothing else to stop that behavior. So what do you think about that, of trying to change that question into an exponential scale rather than a 0, 1, 2?
Yeah, I can kind of take the first crack at that. That is something that we have discussed. We want to make sure that that the fines, especially for repeat violators, are significant enough that they don't just calculate in the fines, especially with folks that aren't doing the maintenance with their facilities, as opposed to kind of remedying the problem. And so I think that the other kind of key thing that we want to make sure is that's really clear is that these fines are in addition to complying with and actually fixing the problem. And so any kind of cleanup costs or maintenance would also need to occur for the facility. So we don't want the fines to be so. We're trying to make sure that the fines are not excessive and that they're defensible, because if these fines are levied, there's an appeal process, and that's to the hearing examiner. So we want to make sure that it's fair, and so what we try to do is put these fines within kind of the marketplace of what we were seeing other nearby permittees are doing, but also with respect to also making sure that these violators are also responsible for cleaning up the problem.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, just exactly what Wayne said. We really wanted to stay within the range of what our neighboring cities are doing within their illicit discharge programs, but also the cleanup is really quite costly. Last week we had a power washing incident where they had to the company had to clean out 8 catch basins, and it was a $4,000 bill that he would have had on top of a $4,000 to $5,000 penalty for doing a $450 job for power washing. So it does get up there quite quickly, and what we want ultimately is clean water. So that's what we want taken care of. We want the system taken care of, and we want the penalty to make sure that the act doesn't happen again. But the cost of cleanup is typically pretty extensive.
And the one other thing I wanted to also point out, and Lisa can give you a better feel in terms of percentage, but probably maybe 70-80% of the violations are situations where there's education, outreach, and then voluntary compliance. And so in any event, this notion of progressive enforcement will still be part of the equation. And so the idea is that for violations that are nominal, or or where there's a real effort to fix them, that there is then it sometimes will end with just education outreach.
Sounds great. While I was reading through that, I also wondered one thing. We always focus a lot on compliance and trying to stop people. But what if this was a plumbing company, Joe's Plumbing, and they are doing a fantastic job, and they've done something that we did not anticipate. It was a best case scenario of trying to make sure that the water is clean, the environment is unaffected by what they're doing, and so on and so forth. Have you seen any city reward such behavior? We talk about fines a lot more than we talk about rewards. Have you come across that in your experience, and what would that be for us to consider, except to wear like a T-shirt saying Joe's Plumbing rocks?
Are you talking like an incentivized type of?
Exactly.
Audrey could probably speak to that a little bit. We do have, or did have, a similar program.
We have a program still for our privately maintained facilities within the city. So multifamily complexes, shopping centers that are not maintained by the cities. They do have the opportunity to receive up to a 35% discount on their surface water fees that are assessed by the city every year. Those fees are set by the amount of impervious surface the parcel has. So there is an opportunity to essentially incentivize a clean and well-functioning stormwater system. But in terms of, a service provider, if you will, just doing a great job, of course we love that, but there's just, it would be very difficult to roll out an incentive program for that.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think since you're talking about the penalties and all that, I'll add, because I had similar comment, but maybe a little bit more specific. If it were me, I would go with the lower level of fines. You had the 3 levels, I'd go with the lower. However, the history or the unresponsive in history of compliance, so numbers 4 and 5 in your list of, I think, 6, feel different to me. And, so if it's a first-time violation, it's one thing. If it's a second time, I'd multiply the fines like by 2. And if it's wanton, willful, like we're trying to get around this and pollute, I'd multiply by 3 times. And then if somebody's self-reported, I would either eliminate if it's the first time or, reduce the amount or something like that. I would make being unresponsive or really trying to just make use of the stormwater system to pollute and save some money, a bigger hit. So if you could please consider that. Like I said, those 2 of the criteria, if you just added another point, it's like another, $500 or another $1,000. It doesn't feel like there's enough weight to those compared to the others. So that's my only other comment. So I don't know if you want to add to the dialogue or not.
Yeah. So I guess how I'm interpreting potentially, and Lisa, Audrey, Helen and I will kind of talk about this, but what we could do for those questions, rather than a 0, 1, 2, in terms of how they're evaluated, it could be, 0,
2, 4 or
2,
something
3.
like that.
Or 2, 4.
It would have the same effect. So something like that would work, so that those should be weighted more heavily, one way or the other. So yeah, that'd be a great option, Wayne.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Carrie?
Sure. Along those lines, one of our commissioners that's not here tonight was looking, I think if I'm interpreting what he was saying, I wrote in, was they seem to be lacking whether they intentionally did it or not. So it kind of rolls into 4, 5, and 6. But do those take into account, did the person know what they were doing was wrong or not?
Yeah, there is language in the draft that talks about kind of purposeful or
Intentional.
intentional. Correct. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. Yep.
And so where does that fit into the penalty matrix?
Could,
I was going to say, we'll need a slide probably.
right. Yeah, I don't know if Helen can reach.
Yeah, I can share my screen again. Did you want to bring up a specific slide or the penalty matrix?
Perhaps the language that
in the red line code.
Yeah, the red line code.
Okay, just give me.
But to your point, I think yeah, we can certainly, if it's not clear enough, we can make sure that purposeful actions that result in violations, intentional, excuse me, violations, and we did discuss this with the city attorney, but rather than the idea of flagrant, we kind of change that to intentional or repeat, and so right now that is kind of directed at the ability of the director to pursue. So the director may pursue it with enforcement or penalties, violations that are intentional or repeat or pose a health or pose a hazard, and that is that's where if there is a situation where even if it's the first time, if it was intentional, then we can go skip straight. We can kind of skip that progressive enforcement, go straight to financial penalties. That's where this is. Now, with respect to the actual matrix and how the fines are established themselves, we tend to think that a lot of those questions kind of deal with intent, but if you think that is missing, we can when we come back, modify one or more of those questions to make sure that intent is also captured in the assessment of the points.
I was thinking that way, and I was thinking question number 6 might be a question where we could capture repeat or intentional. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that's a great comment by the commission.
Yeah, because I was looking at that one while the others were talking. In 6, the violation was not the result of improper or adequate action, so that potentially could cover someone who just pours a can of paint down the stormwater. They weren't improperly. Well, I guess they were improperly disposing of something. So I don't know. That's where I was trying to figure out.
This question really relates to a lot of mechanical issues that we have with contract and construction equipment or garbage equipment, big vehicles that have hydraulic leaks and are not maintained properly. So we definitely want to, I would say out of the 17 illicit discharges that we've had this year, about 13 or 14 of those are related to heavy equipment operation. So this question was definitely aimed in capturing that. So we do want to ensure that we capture that because that is the largest population of our illicit discharges currently, or one of the larger rates of our discharges. But I was wondering if there's a way we could finesse this question to include intentional or repeat. So
Okay.
I think we can look at massaging it a few different ways when we bring it back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And then in the presentation, you had low, medium, and high, and were those? That was a question of they aren't all going to be in the code. You're looking for which one do you want to put in the code? Okay.
Correct.
This one.
Okay. Yeah, and it wasn't in the packet, so it didn't have too much time to digest that. So probably low or medium. That's all.
So without getting into the weeds, I totally support looking more at the willful, egregious stuff to really beef that up. And I believe there's capability to do stop work, you know, if it's silt coming off of a construction site or something like that. Consideration for, you know, contractor working on a owner's property. Did I see somewhere in there that a lien could be put on a property? Or was I just wishful thinking? You know, for really egregious kind of stuff where, well, Audrey's example of a storm and surface water facility that's not being maintained, that could be another form of enticement to make sure those are maintained. As for the actual levels of the fines, the medium or low, I don't have a real strong opinion on that. It's mostly going after the really egregious stuff. And then just a sort of a presentation. I know you cut and then did red lines to the actual code here, but sprinkled through this section of the code are half a dozen or more acronyms, which I know what they mean, but a normal reader of our packet would not. So some sort of little addendum to tell what best management practices are, BMPs, that sort of thing, just make it a little more readable. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the report. It was very comprehensive. I have a number of questions, both from staff as well as the consultant. Audrey, how big is the issues in the city right now as far as violation? Do you know? How often we come across this problem?
I think thankfully not too often. We have a really great stormwater team that provides a lot of education and outreach, so I think that helps a lot. We have a smaller commercial area that also helps. We don't have a heavy industrial area, so all those different things are factors. But I think we just want to make sure that our codes are always as forward thinking as they can be, and so this would be really helping us to look for the future as well, and it takes a lot of that gray area out. But I think Lisa described, you know, our most common things that would happen are typically the result of a mechanical failure, collisions that occur in the roadway. So typically things that occur in the right of way. Obviously, construction site and earthwork has the potential to cause a discharge. And thankfully, all of ours within the city have been relatively small. So, but that doesn't, you know, just because there's been a great history doesn't mean that there, you know, something couldn't happen in the future.
What do we do as far? I'm sorry.
Oh, if I could just add to that for a bit of perspective. Last year, I believe we had like 70 cases, whereas the city of Kirkland had close to 1,000. Wow. So Audrey is absolutely correct. We're very fortunate in the fact that we don't have an industrial type of area, so we don't have those type of problems. And our construction site blowouts, there may be one a year for a bit more perspective. And then, like I said earlier, car accidents and commercial vehicles are usually the bulk of our illicit discharges.
Do we have a monitoring program how the city staff would know that there's a violation taking place? Are you relying on the public to call the city and say, hey, my neighbor is doing this? What system do we have right now in place?
Yes, we do. We have the My Sammamish cell phone app, which is what is predominantly utilized by our citizens. And we also get a few of our illicit discharges that are captured from staff or during commercial facility inspections or our recent source control program inspections that just started in 2023. So we get them from everywhere. We've even received notification from the Department of Ecology when folks don't know who to contact, and they reach out to Ecology, and then Ecology lets the jurisdiction that is responsible for monitoring lets them know. So that's how we find out. But predominantly, I would say 80 to 90% of our notifications come through either a front desk phone call from a citizen or the My Sammamish app has really changed.
And also, I'm assuming that your inspector, that they're going to inspect the projects and the construction, that's one of their responsibility to look at and make sure that there's no problem with that.
Absolutely.
Education, what do we have as far as educating the public? How the public supposed to know what to do and what is permitted, what's not permitted as far as discharging?
Well, we do as much as we can, as often as we can. We do a lot of social media information. We provide information in our newsletters every other month. I'm writing an article on car washing and pressure washing and best management practices for all different types of activities that take place at home or mobile businesses that you may hire, landscapers or car detailers, as well as we use our website. So we have as much information on there as we can. And I do quite a bit of neighborhood mailings. If I get a complaint from a citizen that he keeps seeing his neighbor washing his car, we talk to that neighbor specifically, but we have a broader range of sending a neighborhood mailer to, that entire neighborhood to let them know what best management practices are for car washing or, fertilizing, different home practices that the average individual may not know.
The other thing that you'll see around the city that hopefully educates folks is there's interpretive signs, outside of, say, stormwater ponds and other facilities. There's the stenciling and the decals next to drains, letting people know that those drainage, those catch basins do drain to Lake Sammamish. And so some of that is also stuff that's kind of always there and present to alert folks of the best practices.
I was going to bring that one up, but back to our Public Works Director. Do we have that as a policy that we would provide these stencil at the manholes at the location that discourages people not to dump things in the stormwater?
Absolutely. Placing those drain markers are part of a plat condition. So anytime new development takes place in the city, it is a plat condition that they be placed at every catch basin. And then we have many youth groups, Cub Scouts and high schoolers trying to get their volunteer hours that love to do our drain marking program.
Question to the consultant. I heard you saying about the number of incidents. I didn't hear or see any reference to the quantity, how much. For instance, if I make a violation and I drop a quarter of paint in a discharging basically point, versus somebody has a restaurant and then discharge 10 times, 200 times more, I didn't see reference to the quantity. Am I missing something? Right, an incident, number of incident, of course, is one thing, but the quantity of the violation.
Yeah, there's not a kind of numeric quantity because I think depending on the pollutant, the quantity of that pollutant really varies, or the damage that various pollutants might cause varies depending on what that pollutant is. And so that is, you're correct, that's not in there, but there is that question about the environmental hazard and what that hazard looks like. And that's something that Audrey and Lisa and the city staff would evaluate based on those questions.
Is that case by case?
Yeah, it's case by case. So they look at each violation, kind of on its merits.
If I can expand on that, it also depends, the pollutants or combination of pollutants very much matter, as well as the point of entry into the stormwater system. If there is a pollutant that enters our system through a storm drain and it is able to flow through to our detention facility, and we're able to prevent that from reaching a natural waterway, for example, that's a much better situation for us or for the spiller or polluter to be cleaning up than something that has reached a natural waterway. Other factors that we often consider are the weather. So if something happens during the dry weather and it's an isolated event versus, a half a gallon even, or much, much less of any pollutant and it's raining, it's going to reach much further. With these impacts to our code, please keep in mind too that these do not include the cleanup costs. So those cleanup costs will be either recuperated, reimbursed back to the city if we feel that it is immediate public health threat. We'll go ahead and do the cleanup. Otherwise, it is always the responsibility of the polluters to clean up their spill. So if it reaches more of our system or reaches the waterway, it'll be a much, much bigger cleanup cost.
Hey, I should jump in here. We need to extend the meeting, so probably because we've got public comment and all, another 20 minutes maybe.
Well, and we had the Wasim's.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
maybe 9:30.
Public comments, director reports, and the additional parts.
So I move we extend the meeting to 9:30.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, I think that completes the comments. Good. All right, Audrey, Wayne, Lisa, and Helen, thank you very much. I guess we'll see you soon. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Bye.
I forgot to mention it. We have to congratulate our new Public Works Director, Audrey. I don't know if all of you know that she just was promoted to the Public Works Director.
Oh. All right, but moving along, next on our agenda is public comment on the topics for this evening. So are there any, Jolene?
Yes, we have one hand raised. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Mary Wichter, Sammamish, 22 years. I'll make this short because I think you guys have had a really great meeting with a lot of good presentations, input, and questions by all. So thank you for all for that. Just the first thing on Sammamish economic development and the visioning, there was a lot of work done on visioning, and the old Sammamish vision had bedroom community. I believe any of the new stuff does not. There's also a lot of statistics showing that we are an aging nation as well as an aging city. People are living longer, having less kids, so you're having a lot older people. So I won't go into the other comments that you have, but I just wanted to say that on the visioning part because that was brought up. And then I do a lot of stormwater, and I'm really glad for the updates. Lisa Ware has been with the city a really long time as stormwater technician and just doing great things with water quality. And AHBL, I remember them first in 2016, I think, working on the stormwater comp plan. So I'm glad that they are still doing a lot of stormwater work for the city. And Audrey, congratulations. Yes, Public Works Director. She definitely deserves it and is knows how to do all the work and has been doing a great job for us. I wanted to read just a couple things. When you have water quality, or when you don't do comprehensive stormwater management, which you end up with water quality problems, and when you have water quality problems or spills or things that aren't cleaned up, you really can't afford to fix them later. So it's really important to clean them up right away. So I'm glad Audrey clarified at the end of her remarks there that if it's an urgent situation, the city actually does step in and goes ahead and does the cleanup and then bills back, because that's very important. Also, I don't know, in the past when water quality was reported, sometimes the city did not have a method or a system or people for actually testing water. I know that they employ King County to do the water quality testing for the streams and lakes, and those reports are generated annually. But I don't know if there were spills or other concerns if the city would be able to do that. But I think that's an important thing, is to be able to either have testing or have a contract with somebody who does the testing, so if that needs to get done. And then there are a lot of notices. I know Lisa Ware does a great job trying to communicate more. But one thing I've seen is a lot of like smaller construction sites, like somebody comes out to your house, their vehicle is dripping, or there's an oil left, or like I live on Lewis Thompson Road and I've seen, you know, rainbow all the way from East Lake Sammamish Parkway all the way up to 212 because there's a truck leaking something. And I think we need more awareness of that. Like, you never know who the truck is that does it, so you just report the cleanup. But I think a lot of people could carry spill kits. I don't know if there's a way for the city to ask for that or enforce that. When I've asked in the past, if there's a spill, what do I do if I can't get it cleaned up? And they're like, kitty litter. Well, I don't have a cat and I can't run to the store to do it. And then the kitty litter would go down the drain. A lot of it's clumping. So I think spill kits and people knowing how to clean it up or what to do when they see it, I think is super important. And then one thing that had been in city newsletters a really long time ago, like probably 8 years ago when I started looking at stormwater, is there was a little teeny paragraph in the city newsletter, and it said 1 pint of oil, so not a quart, just a pint of oil, can cover 1 acre of water surface. And 1 quart of oil can cover 2 acres, or nearly 3 football fields of water surface. And it says, can it contaminate drinking water? Yes. 1 gallon of oil can contaminate millions of gallons of water. A single pint of oil released into a lake or wetland can cover 1 acre of surface water and seriously damage aquatic habitat. And just 1 liter of oil can contaminate 1 million liters of water and can have a devastating effect on the water and environment. It spreads out over the surface in a thin layer. That film that you see is a refraction grating, which causes a rainbow effect. So we should have rainbows in the sky, not on the ground. And it spreads out over the surface and stops oxygen from getting into the plants and animals that live in the water. So it is super important that we get this cleaned up. And I will read the code more thoroughly to see if there's any little loopholes or things that I've seen, but I thought you guys did a great job reading it, and I will end my comment early tonight. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Any others?
And we have one more hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hello, planning commissioners. I'll work on keeping this comment short as well tonight. Long meeting, but very good. All of you very engaged. Lots of comment on economic, development. Good, thoughtful analysis of the matrix on stormwater. Enjoyed all the comments, staff, and congratulations to Audrey. Good to hear Kelly having fun at the farmer's market. There was a lot of really great conversations, and Mary, excellent comments as well. I'm just going to share a few resources and refreshers on some of the past economic development in Sammamish. And I'm not sure that these quotes actually apply. I think the information is important, but there are quotes that say things like, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Or Mark Twain said, history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes. I do think, though, it would be good to go back and look at some history in Sammamish, especially from 2012. Mary Wichter is correct. The first vision statement that ran from 2003 to 2015 did have, bedroom community. The The division statement in the second comp plan did not. But there are some fairly major components that I think would be excellent to review for high points. In 2012, the city did about an 80-page report. It was done called Economic Development Self-Assessment Tool in May of 2012. It was done by the Northeastern University Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. They had many findings that dealt with very important factors, strengths and weaknesses, important factors, strengths and weaknesses, and less important factors. A couple other things that are interesting. The town center plan had a market study done by Community Attributes, and the Southeast Quadrant landowner docket item of 2012 was a update of a 2009 request that had a different market study on town center that was done by Matthew Gardner and Jeff Sanford. Then in 2013, the scope for the second comprehensive plan had to do an economic development element. There was lots of funding. Community Attributes was hired. And during 2013, the city had an economic development strategic task force working on the economic development strategic plan that got talked about in 12 and went great guns in 2013. But in early 2014, it kind of faded away and the comp plan element got dropped. I think it would be good to look back without aiming fingers or looking for blame, but to understand what happened that caused all that work to just get stalled and put on the shelf and go silent. I think that would be really good because there was a lot of data that came out in 2013 especially. And then subsequently to that, in 2017 and 18, and I may have these dates wrong, Community Attributes worked on Port of Seattle grants to update significantly community information on economic development in 2017 and 18. By the way, the PSRC consultant staff member was excellent tonight talking about everything. And I'm not getting stuck on this because it's my number one thing, but it is a number one comment to make. Kelly was right that everything is intertwined, but I'm going to say housing, services, and transportation. It's really important to know which directions we're going to go, to what degree we're going to have increases and decreases of different types of housing to meet needs over life, because that'll have an impact on the types of services we offer. And I agree completely with the consultant who talked about needs matter. There's what the community wants to be, but we do need to understand our needs. And one huge thing I learned in a process a few years ago, it's sort of a counterintuitive thing. Market studies, when they're done, are different than a needs analysis because market studies project current trends. Needs analysis identifies potential deficiencies within a community. So I think we need to be doing that. And I commend Mike, Breskel and others talking about a vision for economic, development. So anyway, that's my comment. I know I covered a lot of ground, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks for all the history. You threw in a lot in like 5 minutes there, so thanks. Next on our agenda, we had added the topic that Commissioner Fayed, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate I'm given the time to speak about this topic. So what I'm going to say is not gel well with some people, but I want to be honest. I don't want to come up, upfront with my belief and what I want to say. And hopefully, I'm not trying to insult anybody or trying to praise anybody, but it's feedback based on the conversation that we had with regard to the training that we had with regard to diversity. So as my background as a Muslim person, it is my duty, in my belief, to speak or to promote goodness. And when I see certain things that are not appropriate and not right, to at least speak about it, right? Everybody has the right to speak about and say something. When you see certain things are going in the right direction, say something good about it. If something's going in the wrong direction, it's good for people to speak about it and to provide their opinion. So one of the key things that I go by in my life is a verse from the Quran that I would like to recite right now, which says, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. So this verse in the Quran says, O mankind, O people. It is not O Muslims or O Christians or O Jews or O men or O women. O mankind, all mankind. Verily we have created you from a male and a female. And we have made you into nations and tribe so that you get to know each other, not so that you despise each other and hate each other and fight. So you get to know each other. So part of the creation is that we are here to get to know each other, to learn from each other, so which is really a good thing. So one of the things that I learned from the presentation, and was an eye-opener for me, because in my background, where I come from, we don't have these discrepancies between, people of different colors, different race, different backgrounds. So, and it was, it clicked to me to see how people were disenfranchised with regard to their color, and then they were deprived from, they were created this way. They look this way. Like, for example, one time I was invited in Florida to give a speech, or the Friday sermon, at a prison with the chaplain of that, was a federal maximum security prison. So I went in and I gave the Friday sermon, the Friday speech. And when I finished, there were also people who are not Muslim who attended the speech. They wanted to hear what we're talking about. And I got one of the best comments from one of the inmate. He came to me, and he was an older black person. He came to me, he says, when I look at you, I see a black person, I don't see a white person. This is how close he felt, when we need to embrace each other. And specifically, people, we're created certain ways. But then to club certain people who choose a certain lifestyle and say they are among the minority, I don't believe that is the right thing. And I'm going to be very specific. The LGBT community, and specifically creating a Pride Month for them, these are some of the most wealthy, the most connected people. I had a person who reported to me at Microsoft. He left Microsoft for a job to be an activist in that community that pays double what he was making at Microsoft. So these are not a minority people who are disenfranchised, and then we need to club them as part of the minority people. So in my opinion, these are people that are promoting diseases and infestation into the mind of our kids in schools. So we as a community, we should stand up for this, and that's my belief, and that's where I come from, that I don't believe this is the right way of life. God created us a male and a female, and to go against the creation of God and to spread diseases in the community is something that we should speak up against, or at least I would like to speak up against, because that goes against my belief. So that's what I would like to share. I believe in diversity. This is my life. I love the diverse community in Sammamish, but if someone wants to choose a lifestyle, that's to themselves. They decide on themselves. They do it privately. That's theirs. But to go and make it a thing to promote this in every movie, in every TV show, everywhere, teaching our kids and poisoning our kids with this, I don't believe this is the right thing to do. So I appreciate the time that I was given, and I wanted to share my opinion on this as part of the training. I don't believe that LGBT should be part of the minority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for speaking up and building on the training that we've had. and different points of view. Next on the agenda is our director's report.
My name is Kelly Hildy, and I am the Deputy Director of Community Development. I am here to provide a brief update on 3 important projects: the Housing Diversification Toolkit, formerly known as the Housing Action Plan, the Greenhouse Gas and Vehicle Miles Traveled Reduction Strategy, and the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update. I will also be asking for a volunteer to serve on the city's Fiscal Sustainability Task Force. Don't all jump at once. I'll have more information here. But let's start with the Housing Diversification Toolkit. The city is in the final phase of developing the Housing Diversification Toolkit. The objective of this toolkit is to encourage additional affordable and market rate housing in a variety of housing types at prices accessible to a broad range of incomes. On June 6th, next Tuesday, the City Council will complete a public hearing and take action on a resolution approving the Housing Diversification Toolkit. Once approved, the toolkit will be submitted to the Washington State Department of Commerce, fulfilling the requirements of the housing grant the city received to fund this work. Also on June 6th, it's going to be a busy night. City Council will be reviewing the final draft of the Greenhouse Gas and Vehicle Miles Traveled Reduction Strategy prior to being submitted to the Department of Commerce on June 15th as a final deliverable for the Climate Change Early Planning Grant. The reduction strategy will be integrated into the broader Climate Action Plan, or CAP. The CAP Community Advisory Group will review the draft CAP and related strategies this summer before it goes back to the Planning Commission and the City Council in the fall for review, recommendation, and adoption in late 2023. Tentative meetings related to the CAP are listed on this slide. On June 13th, staff will be seeking direction from City Council on land use and housing alternatives as part of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan update. On June 15th, staff will provide the Planning Commission with an overview of 6 newly enacted bills from the 2023 legislative session signed into law by the governor and discuss the anticipated impacts on the 2024 periodic update to the Comprehensive Plan and associated development regulations. That presentation will shed some light on why we needed to cancel the meeting in May. This has really thrown a wrench into our work. We are still digesting those impacts, but we will have an update for you here at the next meeting. We'll be back in front of Planning Commission on July 6th to discuss land use and housing alternatives. And finally, at the last meeting before summer break, staff will review the transportation and capital facility goals and policies, as well as present the findings of the economic development profile and SWOT analysis. But before I proceed, I would like to confirm who will be in attendance for the upcoming July 6th Planning Commission meeting, considering that this does fall on a holiday week. Oops, I got to put my glasses on. Will. So we're looking, okay. Okay, great, that's perfect. We're going to keep it scheduled. That is a relief because we have a lot coming up and we need to keep our meetings on schedule. As for upcoming community engagement, on June 7th, staff and members of the Climate Action Plan Community Advisory Group will be at the Farmers Market. This event provides an excellent opportunity to engage with the community and gather valuable feedback. Following that, on June 14th, our consultant team will host a lemonade pop-up event at Met Market. The purpose of this event is to actively seek input on and feedback on the comprehensive plan. Furthermore, we will return to the farmers market on June 28th to further engage the community specifically regarding economic development. And as I expressed with enthusiasm earlier tonight, I would love if we could have a planning commissioner join us on June 7th as well as June 28th. being at the farmers market booth is a really fun experience, and being able to hear directly from the community really personalizes that feedback, and I think is really going to help guide your input and direction on the comprehensive plan and all of the elements. So if you are interested, please reach out to Evan Fisher, and we'll get you signed up. I recommend drinking lots of fluids and get ready to chit chat, because you're going to do a lot of it. It is fun. Okay, and for the main event, and what I need to get from tonight is that the city manager's office is asking each of the commissions to identify one commissioner who would be willing to serve on our fiscal sustainability task force. This task force is a component of the city's fiscal sustainability plan project, which is looking at approaches the city can take to resolve our projected structural budget deficit and achieve financial sustainability. The planning commissioner would join other community members in learning more about the city's budget and financial forecast, deliberating potential budget strategies, and developing a recommended approach. The task force will meet 4 times throughout the summer and present their recommendations to the city council at the 5th meeting in the fall. And those dates are listed here on your screen. The commissioner does not need to have any specific knowledge of budgeting or finance, but they would need to be able to commit to attending these meetings. So with that, is anyone interested in serving on this task force? And I can report this back to the city manager. I'll put my glasses on so I can see all of your, oh wow, okay, great. 2. We're gonna need to narrow it down to 1. So maybe there could be a conversation, and as a planning commission, maybe you could make a motion and provide that. We could rock, paper, scissors if that helps. It would be helpful. If it is coming up with a couple that are really interested, maybe you can just, speak to your interest, and we can have a vote from the planning commission.
Actually, how about some of the criteria? What would be ideal for somebody? And I'm sure, the experience of the planning commission, but, specific expertise or knowledge might be helpful.
Right. I'm going to go off of the email that I received earlier today and say the first criteria is, are you available? Can you commit to these 5 dates? They really do need that commitment. So if you can, I would say that's the first criteria. I think the second criteria is that interest in financial stability by the city, for the city, and helping to guide those strategies. This is a big topic. We have talked about this. We're hinting to it quite a bit with this comprehensive plan update. Where we're looking to be in 20 years is going to require a lot more resources, and that's not just on staffing. That's also on making sure we're funding our projects, our capital improvement projects appropriately. So if you have an interest in that and you have experience that could speak to that, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so certainly, being able to understand budget,
right,
that kind of stuff, but also it sounds like potential for capital expenditures and how those get capitalized and funded and so forth. So does that narrow down?
Well, I guess if someone could attend, if they wanted to proactively attend, could I, if I were not to do it, could I attend and listen?
Yeah, I can confirm. I would assume that these would be open to the public, but I could.
Almost anything has to be.
I think it has to be open to the public. So, yeah, but I will follow up on that.
Okay. So, Commissioner Fayed? Did you? Oh, I thought who? Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you must have waved at one point.
If you want to go for it, then I'll listen in.
Do you have the?
So 39 years of experience in local government, a lot of that heavy budget stuff.
Yeah, sounds like a good fit. Okay, we've got to go for it.
Go for consensus. Okay.
And at 9:30, that's probably as good as we're going to get.
Okay, and yes, I will follow up on attendance or being able to watch those on Channel 21 or having access to it, and I will send an email confirming that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Kelly, if you need a resume or something, just let me know.
Okay, I know where to find you.
All right. With that, is there anything else? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second, we have all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody, and good night.